A recap of Memories of Ice by Steven Erikson, Malazan Book of the Fallen, Book 3. Prologue. The mudflats of the former Jagratil. During the 33rd Jaghut War, a Jaghut mother flees pursuit from the Amass with her 2 young children. She is cornered by a bonecaster, Kileva, who offers to save her children while leaving the Jaghut behind to be killed by other Amass warriors. The Jaghut agrees, and Kileva takes the children to what she believes is safety in an opening to the Jaghut Warren Amtos Felak. She sends the children in. The bonecaster Pranchol and his fellow Amass warriors find the Jaghut woman alone. Believing her children to be safe, she accepts her death peacefully. Pranchol realizes that the other bonecaster must have taken the Jaghut children to Morn, where a rent had formed long ago, destroying an ancient city built by the Cain Shamal. Pranchol reaches Morn too late. Upon meeting her, he reveals to Kileva that she has unwittingly sent the children to seal the rent, relegating them to an eternity of pain. They note that the previous soul sealing the rent has been freed nearby, though is imprisoned far underground. Pranchol challenges Kileva to enter the rent herself and free the children, knowing she will refuse. He tells Kileva that the ritual of Telan is about to begin. Kileva says she does not intend to go through with it. Pranchol realizes she is the defiler, the one who slaughtered her clan. Kileva claims she did so for her freedom, a freedom which she celebrates, and which her brother Onos Tulin, also now clanless, curses. 3 years after the fall of the crippled god, the nations of Jacuruku and Karelri have been nearly destroyed by firestorms resulting from the fall. Krull walks the land listening to the screams of pain coming from the crippled god. The crippled god had been summoned through a chaotic warren in order to destroy Collier. Krull finds the body of the crippled god shattered by the fall. He thinks that even if the fallen god pieces himself back together, he will have been driven insane by the shattering. Krull, Draconis, and the Sister of Cold Nights have come to kill Collier, who has been ruling as a tyrant. The 3 elder gods approach the High King, who claims to have incinerated everything and everyone on the continent of Jacuruku, thus thwarting their attempts at liberation. The 3 curse Collier with eternal life, never to ascend but to endure the ravages of old age. They declare that all he does will end in dust. Collier curses them all in return, Krull to fade from the world and be forgotten, Draconis to have his creation turned upon him, Sister of Cold Nights to have her body torn apart upon a field of battle and still know no respite. Leaving Collier, the 3 gods join their power to sweep the bone and ash of the slaughtered continent into a new warren created for that purpose so the now bare land can heal. The effort nearly kills Krull. An ancient beast god watches from afar. Having been wounded by the fall, he retreats to his own warren looking for his mate. Chapter 1. East of Duruhistan. Gruntle, Harlow, and Stani Manakis wait with a band of caravan guards outside of Duruhistan. They have been delayed at a ford crossing while escorting their employer, a merchant named Kareli, to Kapustan. While they wait, Gruntle is approached by a man in rags who identifies himself as Emanciparis. He claims he is the manservant of 2 men who wish to meet Gruntle. Kareli asks Gruntle to go, showing uncanny knowledge of his and Reese's conversation. Gruntle meets Bauchelaine, who leads him to Rayist's empty barrow where they meet Corbel Broach. The 3 discuss the events of Gardens of the Moon and Gruntle learns they plan to descend into Rayist's barrow. Gruntle refuses, despite Bauchelaine's guess that Kareli would want him to accompany them. As he leaves, Gruntle points out Moon's spawn drifting away towards the southeast. Bauchelaine and Corbel Broach wonder if Anomander Rake has sensed them. Deciding that he has not, they enter the barrow as Gruntle returns to camp. Warren of Chaos. Tog finds a human body in his warren. He sees an opportunity, in that this mortal is a mirror to him. Morn. Tog the Younger wakes up in a valley covered in obsidian dust. He realizes that a lot of time must have passed since Herlock threw him into the chaotic warren, but that the time hasn't affected him physically. Having no food or water, he begins walking toward the valley walls and finds he is in a field of barrows. One barrow in particular looks to have been made for something enormous. It goes down deep enough to make Tok believe that whatever it was must have tunneled its way out from far underground. As he exits the valley, He runs into Ono's Tulin, who says he is waiting on someone, and that they are in the ruins of Morn. He tells Tok that 2 months have passed since Adjunct Lorne was killed, and that Imperial efforts to take over Daruhistan have failed. Tok asks him to help him gather food, water, and supplies to repair his bow. Tul agrees, but before they can start, Lady Envy appears with 2 large dogs at her side, Gareth and Baeljag. Tul notices that Baeljag is an extinct species of wolf that once coexisted with the Amass. Tul informs Tok that Lady Envy is one of Draconis' 2 daughters. She is accompanied by 3 Segula warriors whom she has magically enthralled into serving her. Each Segula is compelled to challenge Tul, despite Lady Envy's protests. Senu, the lowest-ranking Segula, makes the first challenge, but is knocked unconscious before he can fully draw his blades. Lady Envy says she has come to Morn to investigate the rent, which Tok sees as a red welt in the sky. She explains that a Kane Chainmail matron once sealed the rent, but a mortal soul now bridges it. Tul says that she will not find any answers in Morn, so she decides to accompany him and Tok as they make their way north. Chapter 2. Talon Hills. Picker and Blend have set up a checkpoint on one of the backroads through the East Talon Hills between Daruhistan and Pale. They stop an elderly artisan named Munich. He says he is on the road to Pale to sell his wares, among them an armed torque blessed by a priest of Treach, the Tiger of Summer. Picker says that Treach is no god, merely an ascended soul taken, but offers to purchase the torque using coin they have procured from other travelers. Picker searches his bag, clicks the torque into place on her arm, and sends Munich on his way. Crippled God's Warren. Munich travels along the road to Pale, but turns into a warren where he meets the crippled god. He thinks to himself that while he can certainly carve jewelry, his true talent lies in painting. Munich gives the crippled god a deck of cards with paintings of other gods and goddesses in varying forms of imperfection, injury, and loneliness. In payment, the crippled god heals the cancer affecting Munich, but takes away the use of his legs, leaving him in the desert to crawl back to civilization. Talon Hills. Picker and Blend regard the torque and discuss how they secreted one of Quick Ben's seeking stones into Munich's pack. Alarmed by her inability to remove the torque, Picker seeks Quick Ben's help. Quick Ben says he cannot remove the torque, the soul taken is too insane to bargain with. He magically projects his soul to find where Munich took his seeking stone. Crippled God's Warren. Upon arriving at the crippled god's tent, Quick Ben realizes that the crippled god has poisoned Burn. The crippled god tells Quick Ben that he will give him back his stone in exchange for a service. Quick Ben attacks, retrieving his stone. Before he escapes, he is assailed by the crippled god's power. As he is dragged back into the tent, he notices the earth is bleeding. Suddenly, a large hand from underground grabs him and pulls him downward. Quick Ben finds himself in a cavern with a giant figure seemingly made from diamond-studded clay. Quick Ben realizes he is within the living warren of Burn. The giant figure asks him to save the goddess, lest they all die. Quick Ben promises he will find a way to help and leaves his stone in the cavern. He wakes up at the camp with Picker and Blend. Picker helps him onto a quarrel to return to Pale. Quick Ben declares that everyone is in danger. The Divide. Jano's Paran is on the main road through the divide between Daruhistan and Pale, collecting tolls at a trade post. He's been suffering from nightmares, pain, and illness ever since the fate in Daruhistan, believing it to be the direct result of touching the Hound of Shadow's blood. He speaks with Trotz, who has begun affecting a more tribal look. Paran tries to guess at why he is doing this, suspecting it is something to do with a plan by Whiskey Jack for the upcoming parley with Kaladin Brood. Trotz replies in riddles, and Paran leaves more confused. Hedge appears, commenting on how Trotz is simply having fun with their new captain. The two discuss how Whiskey Jack is not explaining his plans to anyone. Paran meets with Whiskey Jack and Mallet. Whiskey Jack is refusing treatment for the leg he broke at the fete in Daruhistan, which Mallet says healed badly. Paran and Whiskey Jack discuss the plan for Dujik Onurm's forces and that the 38 remaining bridge burners won't be marching with them. Whiskey Jack offers Paran a different post, as the bridge burners have an abiding dislike for noble-born officers. Dedaran arrives and Paran orders them to get ready to march. Paran thinks on how his nightmares and pain have changed him for the worst. He tries to think on how Tavor will salvage his family after his being outlawed, and that Tattersail has been reborn. He has a spike of pain and sees a vision of a screaming child, a wolf howling in the darkness, and a soul nailed to a wound. Mallet tells Whiskey Jack that Paran is sick with sorcery warring within him, and that he needs quick Ben. Whiskey Jack challenges Mallet to say that Paran is unfit for duty. Mallet admits he will be fine for now. Whiskey Jack refuses treatment for his leg, claiming he needs to prepare for the parley with Kaladin Brood. Chapter 3. Near Pale. A young Rivi woman, known only as the Maib, awakens in her tent. Not long ago she was young and unwed, refusing all marriage proposals due to the generations of war afflicting the Rivi. After the death of her parents, she caught the attention of Pranchol and Krull, who considered her a perfect candidate to be a vessel for a child born in the influence of the Telan Warren. The Maib feels unnaturally older, and knows that her child has unwittingly leached her youth from her, as she grows at a fast rate. She tries not to be bitter about this, but thinks that she ultimately fails. Exiting the tent, she meets a Teast Endi woman known as Corlett, who has taken to watching the child. The Maib's child, named Silverfox, now appears to be about 10 years old despite only being born 6 months ago. Corlett mentions that there is little about the child that seems alarming, but that Collier still insists that Silverfox is evil, regarding her with a hatred he won't explain to anyone. The Maib considers that Kaladin Brood only stands in opposition to him because he needs the troops the Rivi provide. She wonders if the proposed alliance with Onarm's host will change his mind. Silverfox approaches and begins saying things that put both Corlett and the Maib on edge, sounding more like the wisest of the shoulder women than a little girl. The Maib thinks that among the 3 present, she herself is the youngest, Corlett having lived for thousands of years, and Silverfox possessing memories that go back for hundreds of thousands of years. Silverfox says they should go quickly if they want to witness the parley between Dijik One-Arm and Kaladin Brood. At the parley, Dijik appears with Whiskey Jack and a standard-bearer named Artanthos. Kaladin Brood appears with Collier and Outrider Hurlichel. The two discuss their various assets. Collier says that the Crimson Guard won't be joining the fight against the Panyan Seer, but that he's replenished his numbers with fighters from the Barghast and the Mod Irregulars, to Whiskey Jack's self-deprecating amusement. Dijik explains that while they have the support of the Black Morinth, the Clan Amass won't be participating in this fight. Crone appears, bringing word from Animander Rake. She say he finds it amusing that Dijik and Kaladin Brood have been fighting all these years, despite being so similar in personality. Dijik asks what he can expect from the Teast Endi, saying that Moon's spawn offers tantalizing opportunities for troop movements. Neither Brood nor Corlett can comment on what Rake might be planning. As they speak, Silverfox mentions to the Maib and Corlett that both Whiskey Jack and Dijik are hiding a secret, though she trusts Whiskey Jack for some reason. She says that Artanthos is not what he seems, though Corlett senses no illusion. Crone also warns Silverfox that she will need protection, as the magic connecting her to the Maib won't be enough. The parley moves into the command tent where Whiskey Jack finds a massive wooden table once belonging to the bridge burners. It was stolen during a battle in Black Dog Forest. Silverfox then speaks, calling Whiskey Jack Uncle, which makes Collier angry. Telling everyone she should be killed before she can betray them all, he grabs Silverfox. Kaladin Brood threatens him, as does Whiskey Jack. When Collier scoffs at this, Whiskey Jack strikes him across the face, knocking him to the floor. Kaladin Brood diffuses this, saying that Collier should not be so contemptuous of their allies. Collier insists that Silverfox is evil, pointing to the Maib and revealing to Silverfox that she is feeding on her mother's life force, causing her to age rapidly. When Whiskey Jack expresses confusion as to why she is in the tent, Silverfox offers to explain who she is. Describing the events that took place in Gardens of the Moon, she declares that she is the reborn soul of Tattersail and Night Chill combined. She also claims that she was birthed in the Telan Warren as well as on the Rivi Plain, and that she now commands the Clan Amass. She proclaims that they will need the Clan Amass for the upcoming battle. The parley continues with Dujek and Brood discussing the movements of the Panyan Daman. They've taken over several cities using powerful armies and a horde of starving peasants called the Teniskauri. Dujek claims that he's heard disturbing rumors concerning the Teniskauri, cannibalism being the least of them. They discuss where their armies should go next, Kapustan to aid the mercenary company called the Grey Swords, and then on to Coral to bring the fight to the Panyan Seer. Silver Fox chimes in, saying that Whiskey Jack and Dujek plan on liberating Kapustan, but doing so indirectly as Malazans have traditionally done. This creates some tension in the tent, and the Maib, Silver Fox, and Corlet exit accompanied by Whiskey Jack. Whiskey Jack asks Silver Fox how much she remembers from Tattersall's life. She remembers Whiskey Jack and Quick Ben with fondness, and Hairlock and Tashran with suspicion. She seems embarrassed when Whiskey Jack asks about Piran, and the Maib realizes they were lovers. Silver Fox says that Piran already knows about her, and reminds the Maib of the man who defeated our spears. Whiskey Jack claims he'd like her to meet Quick Ben and Mallet so they can learn more about her. Silver Fox agrees, saying she'd like to know more about herself. Silver Fox and the Maib leave. Corlet asks Whiskey Jack if he can tell her any more about the souls inside of Silver Fox. Whiskey Jack says that Balerdan, a Thelaman mage who was once Nightshill's mate, was sent to bring Tattersall in as an outlaw. The two ended up killing each other, but Tattersall survived by inhabiting Nightshill's remains. She asks one final question: if the souls of Nightshill and Tattersall reside now in Silver Fox, where did the soul of Balerdan go? Whiskey Jack has no answer. Chapter 4. East of Daruhistan. Gruntle, Harlow, and Stani Manakis bring Carolee's wagon over a dilapidated ford, Harlow and Stani having had to push after betting with Gruntle that Botchelane's massive wagon would sink while crossing. The two go to clean themselves up, and Gruntle sees a friend of his, Buick, getting hired by Botchelane. He remembers that Buick lost his family to a tenement fire, and has since taken to guarding poor merchants' caravans in an attempt to die nobly. Gruntle laments that joining with Botchelane will only make Buick a witness to violence and death, not the victim. Gruntle invites Buick over for tea. Buick speaks about a series of grisly murders in Daruhistan that attracted the attention of the Torrid Cabal, who, in their inexplicable fear, hired the Assassin's Guild. Shortly after Botchelane and Corbel Broach left the city, the murders stopped. Buick is convinced that Corbel Broach is the murderer. Gruntle realizes that Buick intends to try killing Corbel Broach, or die in the attempt. He tries to convince him to send word to the Assassin's Guild, but doesn't have much luck. Stani and Harlow return, and Stani confronts Buick, who leaves when she mocks his eagerness to step into dangerous scenarios. Gruntle thinks Stani only says these things because she cares for him. Pale. In Pale, Quick Ben arrives at the home of the Witch of Tennies, who will answer questions in exchange for coin. After being forced to ask some minor questions, Quick Ben asks her why Byrne sleeps, to which she replies, "She sleeps to dream." Quick Ben says that since she's been poisoned, her dreams have become fevered. He tells her that her fever won't be enough to cure the sickness, and that he'll need help. The witch offers her aid, and Quick Ben gives her one of his seeking stones along with her payment in gold. As Quick Ben exits, he thinks it curious that the witch had said, "I prefer the cold." He then meets Janot's Piran. Quick Ben says that Piran is to join him, Mallet, and Spindle as they meet Dujik One Arm on the outskirts of town. Kaladin Brood's camp. Piran, still feeling sick, rides out of town with Spindle in the lead, whose warren causes all the animals in town to behave erratically. They meet Dujik, who tells Piran that his parents have both died, his sister Tavor is Empress Lazine's new adjunct, and that his youngest sister, Felisin, was sent to the Otadro mines. Dujik believes that Tavor did this to keep Felisin from being killed during the most recent culling of the nobility, and that she most likely intends to retrieve her once things calm down. Piran isn't convinced. Whiskey Jack tells Piran that they've got a meeting arranged with several members from Kaladin Brood's army, among them a girl named Silver Fox who, he explains, is Tattersall and Nightshill reborn. Piran already knows about the rebirth but has avoided thinking about it, and is unsure of whether he wants to meet her or not, given their past relationship and her current physical age. Whiskey Jack implores him, saying she possesses great power that will be crucial in the upcoming conflicts, and that contact with him will bring Tattersail's soul to the surface. Whiskey Jack says she's in danger from Collier and that the Malaz Second Army needs to make a decision whether or not to protect her. He also mentions that Silver Fox has given Piran a name, the Wanderer within the Sword, referring to his journey into Dragnapur. Given that this is something no human or ascendant has ever done, this might put Piran in danger when Anomander Rake returns, whenever that might be. Piran finally accedes, and the two make their way to the gathering. Hedge, Trots, Dedarin, Spindle, Picker, and Blen sneak into Brood's command tent during the night to steal back the table. Hedge claims it was a crucial part to the card game he and Fiddler used to play with the deck of dragons. The table, he says, has another deck between the two layers of the surface, and that Fiddler, being an adept, would know what each player's hand would be. They carry the table to an empty tent, and start a card game with Spindle as the dealer, hoping to run the same con. It backfires, with each member losing all their money. Spindle looks beneath the table and finds that a new card has been painted on the underside, a large unexpected card featuring a character with a dog face emblazoned on his chest. Spindle wants to get supplies to duplicate the card. Piran has been with Silver Fox for several hours, emotionally exhausted and unable to reconcile himself to her current condition, despite having fond memories of who she was in a past life. He also notes the presence of Nightchill's bitterness towards being betrayed at Pale. Silver Fox explains that she is the first flesh and blood bonecaster to exist in hundreds of thousands of years. The clan amass await a benediction from her, but she needs to know more about the Panyan Daman before she gives it. They discuss the deck of dragons, and Silver Fox posits that the Azath houses must be linked somehow with the houses in the deck. She explains that Kelland and Dancer used the Azath house to take the empty throne of High House Shadow. Piran makes the guess that the wagon being dragged inside Dragnapur must be the entrance to High House Dark. Silver Fox says that a new card has arrived, one to aid in the upcoming war that will affect all the Warrens, and that Piran is this card, the master of the deck. Silver Fox finally reveals she knows about the screaming child in Piran's visions. She tells him he must run toward the child, and that he is now a part of an unseen war brewing within the reaches of power. Piran is certain he is a poor choice. Piran ruefully thinks that, despite the anguish he now feels, he successfully brought Tattersail's soul to the lead. However, he thinks he will fail everyone in the end. Chapter 5. North of Morn. In the prairies north of Morn, Tok the Younger, Lady Envy, and Onos Tulin make camp. Lady Envy has been making Tok uncomfortable with her flirting, knowing her to be capable of overthrowing his mind if she so wanted. Tool has assembled materials which he and Tok can use to make arrows. Lady Envy tasks the Segula with preparing her bath and cooking a meal. Tok sets to pitching the tents. Tok and Tool talk about Lady Envy. Tool says she was once a companion of Anomander Rake's. They once traveled with Kaladin Brood and a soul-taken named Oseric, but Brood took to traveling alone and reappeared 1,000 years ago carrying a large hammer. It is said that the hammer has the ability to awake and burn. No one knows where Oseric is. Lady Envy and Anomander Rake split when the Ascendants gathered to chain the crippled god. Envy did not participate in the chaining. Tok mentions the Segula, saying that the oldest, Mok, has a mask with 2 marks, making him the 3rd strongest warrior on their island. There exists a Segula with an unmarked mask whom the Segula consider their leader. They are both curious as to why the Segula were on the mainland. Tool asks Senu, who respects Tool as a superior after being defeated by him. Senu says that they are a punitive army, seeking to kill the Panyan Seer for sending his missionaries to their island and rejecting their invitation to go to war. With the meal cooked, Lady Envy approaches with the other 2 Segula warriors. Thuril suddenly draws both his swords and attacks Tool, who backs away into the darkness as he parries the blows. Despite her anger at being disobeyed, Lady Envy admits that their duel is an impressive one. She tells Tok of how Anomander Rake once visited the island of the Segula in disguise. For 2 hours he was constantly under attack and escaped into his warren after killing 20 warriors, the last wearing a mask with 7 marks. Mok says that Rake must come back to the island and claim the mask, as he is now the seventh among the island, the story of his battle having survived for centuries. Tool returns with Thuril unconscious. Tool admits Thuril was a worthy opponent, but only used the flat of his blade. Mok is impressed by this, but when he attempts to prevent Lady Endy from healing Thuril magically, she attacks him with sorcery. The camp begins their meal. Pale. Outside of Pale, Whiskey Jack, Quick Ben, and Mallet discuss Janot's Perron's condition. They both conclude that Perron shouldn't be sick from his contact with the Hounds of Shadow, but that every time the sorcery within pushes him towards ascendancy, he resists. It is this that's making him sick. Whiskey Jack isn't happy with the situation, given that so much might rest on having Silver Fox protected and on their side. Quick Ben describes how Night Chill, as opposed to Tattersail, is a mysterious, somewhat unsettling character. He mentions that there are multiple sorceresses going back centuries that use the name Night Chill, and it is possible they are the same person. The three head back to camp, and Whiskey Jack orders Mallet and Quick Ben to watch Perron closely. He says they are to give him a push of their own if they think he needs it. Whiskey Jack and Dujek One-Arm discuss strategy. According to Dujek, Moon's spawn will appear at Koro when the armies meet the Panyan Daman. Dubious as to Silver Fox's ability to show restraint with the Tlan Amass at her command, both agree that it's vital to keep the soul and wisdom of Tattersail in the lead. The two leave to meet the delegation from the Noble Council of Daruhastan. Kaladin Brood's camp. At his war camp, Kaladin Brood is questioning Corlett and the Maib on why Silver Fox is taking so much life from her mother. The Maib guesses that since the Tlan Amass, Tattersail, Night Chill, and Belerdin are all dead, the forces required to bring Silver Fox to life must come from her. With the threat from Collier, Silver Fox seems to be drawing energy from her at a faster rate in order to protect herself. Brood guesses that she still needs to be accepted by the Tlan Amass, and perhaps she grows more quickly because she fears being rejected if she appears to them as a child. The Maib asks what Brood will do if the soul of Night Chill were to rise to the surface, thinking that he will step aside and allow Collier to kill her daughter. Brood simply states that he will endeavor to aid the Malazans in keeping Tattersail at the forefront. The three begin preparing to meet the delegation from Daruhastan. The delegation arrives with Krupp in the lead. The Maib recognizes him and tells him she was once in his dreams. Krupp is appalled at how much she has aged, perceiving the relationship between her and Silver Fox. Brood asks him if he can identify the elder god responsible for the birth of Silver Fox, but Krupp demurs, saying that it might cause problems to speak too openly of it. Kal, Murillo, and Estrasian Darrow arrive as the real representatives of Daruhastan's council. They adjourn to the command tent to discuss supply lines and material. Given the route the armies are to take, the council would be hard-pressed to get supplies to them. Krupp, however, suggests they employ the Trigall Trade Guild to oversee supplying the armies. All agree. Crone senses magic not coming from anyone in the tent. She flies to where the bridge burners are performing readings with the deck of dragons. Several revelations are made. The obelisk is active for the first time in years, and High House Shadow has a new assassin whose face looks like Kalam Mekker. The new card on the bottom of the table seems to be imposing some kind of order onto the rest of the deck, but doesn't appear to be active. Crone looks beneath the table. Perron and the Maib leave the command tent. The Maib leads him to the bridge-burner's tent where he orders them to return the table to Kaladin Brood. Spindle recognizes Perron's face as the one beneath the table. Whiskey Jack meets with Perron and explains that the bridge-burners will be accompanying Trots to the White-Face Barghast clan to see if they can convince them to fight the Panyan Daman. Anamander Rake arrives in the form of a dragon. When Rake stumbles back into his T-Standii form, he is approached by Corlett, the Maib, and Collier, all asking for his judgment on Silver Fox. Kaladin Brood appears and demands that Rake keep Dragnapur sheathed. Seeing Silver Fox, Anamander Rake attempts to examine her with his sorcery, which she bats aside. The Maib senses fury from both Tattersail and Night Chill and also a third entity she doesn't recognize. Rake, wondering what she seeks to hide from him, reaches for his sword, leading Brood to unlimber his hammer. Collier and Whiskey Jack also draw blades. Suddenly, the table bursts out of the command tent with Krupp hanging from one of its legs. Paran, in full view of Picker, suddenly disappears from view and reappears in front of Anamander Rake. He sees his own face painted on the table and is struck by a wave of pain. Quick Ben moves between Rake and Paran and suggests that fighting might not be the smartest idea. Finnest house and beast hold. Paran suddenly finds himself in the Finnest house in Deruhistan in the company of Reyes and two bodies, Ralik Nam and Vorkin. Reyes tells Paran to follow him, calling him the master of the deck. Paran asks why the deck needs a master, and Reyes proclaims that a war is coming that will affect all the houses, warrens, gods, and humans. They arrive at a place whose floor is made of flagstones, one of which bears the image of a hut. He suddenly finds himself in the same physical realm as the hut, and, upon entering it, discovers it is the site of the beast's hold, the thrones of which are empty. Paran thinks how tragic it is that the Tlanamas, in their ritual, have outlived their gods. He returns to the area with the flagstones and sees an image of Byrne. He notices she is marred, and at the heart of the wound he sees a huddled shape chained to it. He realizes that the hammer Kaladin Brood carries has the ability to shatter her and unchain the crippled god. Byrne would be ambivalent about this, being able to simply restart, but humanity would suffer with the crippled god unleashed. Kaladin Brood chooses not to use the hammer for the sake of humanity. Paran returns to Reyes weeping. Kaladin Brood's camp. Paran returns to the war camp, where Rake decides to put away his sword. All parties relax, and Quick Ben offers to get the table down, causing Anamander Rake to eye him curiously. Quick Ben asks not to be examined by Rake's magic. Rake accedes. The Mybe hobbles off in great pain and is greeted by Crone. Crone asks if she can do anything to help, to which the Mybe says there is nothing. She thinks she will soon descend to hatred and despair if her condition continues, and wishes only to go to her tent. Corlett appears and proclaims she won't allow her to give in and kill herself. The Mybe says this will only hasten her descent into hatred. Anamander Rake and Kaladin Brood discuss how Byrne is dying and how the Ascendants, including themselves, Hood, and the Queen of Dreams, all agreed that chaining the crippled god was necessary. Yet if Byrne were to die, Brood says, her warren will be the crippled god's path into the other warrens. If this were to happen, the other warrens and all magic will die. When Anamander Rake suggests that this wouldn't be the worst thing that could happen, Brood mentions that the destruction won't stop there. Discussing the Panyandaman, Rake mentions that their sorcerers use the Warren of Chaos. Brood says it can't be a coincidence that the crippled god's poison is chaotic in nature. Rake isn't happy at the news that Silverfox has summoned the Tlanamas. Whiskey Jack and Quick Ben discuss what to do with the card painted on the table. Whiskey Jack suggests they send it to Barrack via the Trigull Trade Guild. Silverfox says they'll need it here, as there is more than one war going on. The Rivi begin carrying it away. Collier tells Whiskey Jack that he will regret standing in defense of Silverfox. He threatens Paran and Quick Ben, who causes a hole to appear beneath his feet. I'll leave him to his efforts in getting out. Quick Ben and Whiskey Jack discuss how Silverfox has aged 5 years since the day of the parley, and that the Mybe appears to be near death. Whiskey Jack asks Quick Ben what he's discovered as he's heard of his visiting witches and participating in arcane rituals. Quick Ben says he's still investigating, but it won't interfere with the efforts against the Panyan army. He does mention that the Rivi spirits appear to be gone, cleaned out. Whiskey Jack senses that Quick Ben is worried about something immense. Quick Ben, however, decides not to tell Whiskey Jack that Byrne is dying because he has enough to worry about already. Chapter 6. Saltone. Gruntle, Harlow, Stani Manakis and their caravan enter the city of Saltone, whose army and guard have left to aid in the battle against the Panyandaman. On the way through town, they're stopped by Nectara, who says she's there to escort them to a meeting of the various gang leaders and thieves. Carolee tells him that he planned on having this meeting. Gruntle accepts his orders, but wonders who exactly Carolee is. At the meeting, Carolee tells the crowd that the war against the Panyan Seer must be fought with disinformation as well as with soldiers. He tells them that they're the only ones able to turn public opinion against the Panyandaman in such a way as to prevent civil unrest. One of the attendees of the meeting described rumors of the Tenaskauri women raping dying or dead soldiers and bearing children by them. Carolee confirms these rumors, calling them the children of the dead seed. Carolee admonishes them that they have no choice but to aid in this war, lest the Tenascauri come to them as well. Speaking with Gruntle after the meeting, Carolee claims it was a success. Vision plain. On the way out of Saltone, Gruntle finds the badly burned corpses of at least a dozen bandits. He fears it was the work of Bauchelain and Corbel Broach, assuming they were in the city recently due to the recent bout of brutal murders. Stani Menakes finds a group of white-faced Barghast warriors, and Carolee suggests that they ride with them. The Barghast warriors, 3 siblings named Hetan, Kefal, and Nitak, claim they are seeking out demons that walk upright and have blades for arms. They agree to accompany Gruntle's caravan. The group find the ruins of Bauchelain's wagon. The Barghast warriors are angry that Bauchelain has pillaged one of their barrows and stolen the spirit of the shaman that was buried within. While they find no bodies, Gruntle finds some disturbing signs that Bauchelain and Corbel Broach are both necromancers. He determines that Bauchelain summons demons and that Corbel Broach reanimates corpses, the remains of the murder victims in Durohistan and Saltone cobbled together into a human shape being the most damning evidence. The 2 necromancers return with Buick and Emanciparis, and explain that they were set upon by undead creatures resembling lizards, but they were not demons. They warn that there are more out there, and they could arrive at any time. The Barghast shaman that once resided in the barrow now resides in a stick snare, a bundle of sticks and twine resembling a person, and is monitoring the progress of the undead hunters. They say they'll have little warning, but enough to mount a defense. All begin making their own preparations. Gruntle speaks to Buick, trying to persuade him to leave the service of the 2 necromancers. He tries to guilt Buick into seeing reason, but Buick isn't moved. Buick is convinced that they'll all die before the morning, but Hetan and the Barghast have confidence their sorcery will protect them. When the attack comes, the Barghast warriors seem to merge into a fog. Carolee explains that what approaches arcane Chamal Kel hunters, and for the first time is truly worried. Bauchelain and Corbel Broach attack the hunters directly with sorcery. One hunter slips past and attacks Gruntle. Harlow tries to protect him, but Gruntle sees him go down. After being picked up and thrown by the Kel hunter, he feels himself being squeezed by a taloned foot which suddenly stops after Gruntle feels the impact of multiple blows. Believing he is dying, Gruntle's vision goes dark and he finds he can't feel anything, not even pain. The last thing he hears is the sound of shrieking as consciousness fades. Chapter 7. Kapustin. Carnadas, the destriant of Finis Reve, looks over Kapustin and envisions the inevitable siege by the Panyan Daman. Berkalion, the mortal sword, has been meeting with Prince Jalarkin and the masked council for weeks trying, unsuccessfully, to convince the city's rulers to take a more proactive approach to the defense. Each member of the masked council styles him or herself after various gods and ascendants. Rathfiner, to Carnada's disgust, seems less worried about the defense of Kapustin than his own political power. He hopes to take the title of Destriant, not knowing that Carnadas already possesses it. Itkovian, the shield Envil, arrives with Berkalion bearing the news that Rathdrake has sensed demonic apparitions on the plains outside Kapustin. Carnadas tells Itkovian to investigate it. They further speak of a magical invitation being sent to them from what Berkalion describes as 12 souls. They answer the call and are greeted by Quick Ben, who brings them news of Kaladin Brood's army and their eventual arrival. They discuss how the leadership of the city is divided between the masked council and Prince Jalarkin, and agree to meet at a later time. Vision plain. Back at the camp of Onurm's hosts, Quick Ben tells Whiskey Jack he successfully contacted the defensive forces of Kapustin. While Quick Ben is dismissive of the Grey Swords, Whiskey Jack is not. Kapustin. Itkovian musters his troops and notes a young female recruit. They leave Kapustin looking out for the demonic apparitions. They spot one, an undead Kane Chamal Kel hunter. Despite their careful preparations, the Kel hunter kills a great many of the Grey Swords and is only dispatched after being torn apart by several ropes tied around it. Itkovian looks up in the distance and sees 4 more Kel hunters appear. Before they can muster an attack, Pranchol appears and relieves them with an army of Tlan Amass. The Kel hunters are destroyed, but at great cost to the amassed troops. Pranchol informs Ikovian that they are here to answer a summons. Messengers are sent to Kapustin, accompanied by several bonecasters, to inform Karnatas what happened. Ikovian agrees to act as bait, while the clan amass travel as dust, intending to kill as many Cain Shamal as they can. Ikovian speaks to the young recruit, who insists on remaining with the main troop. Ikovian warns her this won't heal the trauma of seeing her comrades die. Pranchol mentions that someone is controlling the Cain Shamal from afar and fears that it may be the matron that finally unearthed herself from the barrow at morn. Ikovian mentions the Panyan seer, which surprises Pranchol because Panyan is a Jag Hut word. Plain of Lamatath. Tok the Younger is at his camp with Onos Tulin, two of the Segula, and Baal Jag. He muses wryly as to how his only sane companion is a prehistoric wolf. He jokingly asks Baal Jag what her story is and is suddenly struck with a vision of the ice history. He sees her family die in a tar pit, but is herself rescued by an elder god who grants her a time running with the spirits of her own kind in a dream world until she is needed. Tok awakens to see Tool arriving with a freshly killed animal to eat, and insists on doing the cooking while Lady Envy is away. He says that he won't treat the Segula as servants, but as traveling companions, which causes the Segula to stare at him. Tok mentions his encounter with Baal Jag's story, and Tool reacts with unexpected anguish, though he later denies it. Tool senses a connection between the souls of Tok and Baal Jag and, upon learning that Tok lost his eye to a rock falling from Moon's spawn, gives Tok a new name, Arrowfail. He mentions that his own name means flawed flint, and that the name has many connotations to it. Tok is struck by another vision, and finds himself looking out from the eyes of Trake, the Tiger of Summer, who lay dying after a fight with 4 Kell hunters. Trake thinks to himself how he has not known a human thought in centuries, only animal rage. He thinks on how the destruction of the first heroes by the clan Amass, now several centuries past, was necessary and right. The Kell hunters leave him to die, but are abruptly destroyed when a Black Panther arrives, killing them with sorcery. Satisfied with seeing his killers dispatched, Trake thinks he is ready to die. The Panther is a soul-taken Amass, not undead, who tells him he must not give up, and that he will be needed in the oncoming war of the gods. Senu slaps Tok awake, telling him that the meal is prepared. Tok tells Tool what he saw and is unsurprised when the Black Panther from his vision arrives. The Panther turns out to be Kileva, Tool's sister, who says she remembers seeing Tok looking out from Trake's vision through his missing eye. Tool tells her that this new gathering of the clan Amass could be her chance to reunite with her people. Kileva scoffs at this, and says she is going for a different reason. The voice of an elder god tells Tok that she goes to right an old wrong. The elder god further tells Tok that he intends on sending him into the Panyan Seer's hands to help free those under his power, something he probably won't forgive him for. Kileva leaves, saying the meeting has given her hope. Tok reassures Tool, who promises to tell him about Adjunct Lawrence's death. The Segula call Tool and Tok over for the meal, calling them Stone Blade and Stone Arrow, to Tok's amazement. Kalos. Lady Envy, meanwhile, has traveled to the city of Kalos with Mok and Gareth. Upon entering the city, she finds its inhabitants slaughtered, perhaps 30,000 people having been killed. She makes her way to an old temple where she is contacted by Krull, who tells her that the people of Kalos weren't slaughtered by Cain Shamal, but by a fleet of unhuman killers on ships. He refuses to name them, saying they have returned to the sea. Envy expresses her dislike of having to care for his unwitting servants, referring to the Segula and her difficulty in keeping them under her sway, especially Mok. She claims that Mok will easily defeat Tool if he is allowed to challenge him. Krull admits he didn't think the first of the Segula would send someone so highly ranked, but rather send several score low-ranked initiates to distract the Panyan Seer from the Malazan army. When Envy becomes petulant, Krull reveals that all the Warrens used for sorcery, including the Elder Warrens Curald Galine and Starvald Demelaine, draw power from his blood. Krull says he doesn't wish to be a tyrant with his presence in the Warrens, but he is frightened by the crippled god. When Envy asks what he needs her to do, he tells her to take his servants into the heart of the Seer's territory, but to take special care of Tok the Younger. She leaves, but not before Krull warns her against using her warren within the Panyan Damon's territory, as his blood is poisoned there. He says it is a poison envy can defeat, but Tok the Younger cannot. Vision plain. While on the road, Itkovian and Pranchol encounter Bauchelain and Corbelbroch and find the wreckage of Gruntel's caravan along with several hundred undead eye. Bauchelain and Corbelbroch aren't unscathed, but seem to be healing themselves. The others are all unconscious and wounded. The Grey Swords mages draw upon Karnata's warren to begin healing them, and one notes that they all seem to be in a magical, protective sleep. At one point Corbelbroch tries to approach Pranchol, who strikes him to the ground. Pranchol later tells Itkovian that Corbel is a eunuch and insane, but that Bauchelain is the more dangerous of the two. As the party sets off towards Kapustin, Itkovian asks that when they reach the city, the Tlan amass and the Tlan I remain hidden from sight. Kapustin. Karnata's is in a meeting with Prince Jalarkan, suffering headaches as his Denul warren has been used up. Jalarkan looks haggard after his discussions with the masked council, who wish to commit the bulk of their troops to a suicidal outpost. Jalarkan leaves after begging Karnata's to find him. Leverage. Karnata's and Brukalian discuss what must have happened for Itkovian to require so much of Karnata's warren when Itkovian's outrider, Silise, appears. She relays to them the story of the battle and their relief by unexpected allies. When she mentions emissaries from said allies, 3 Crone Tlan amass bonecasters appear, Bek Oken, Bendalholm, and Okro Lam. Silise introduces them, pointing out their abilities as soul taken. Bendalholm steps forward and says that the Tlan amass did not come to seek a battle, but to answer a summons. Refusing to give details on the nature of the summons, Bendalholm simply says they might be of less use once the gathering is finished. Bek Oken questions Karnata's as to the nature of the Panyan seer. Karnata's answers that he is simply a mortal man, with no glamour cast over him. Bek Oken thinks there might be someone in his shadow. The 3 bonecasters leave, and Karandas and Brukalian are left to discuss these new developments. 2 hours before dawn, with the arrival of Itkovian's troops imminent, Brukalian waits in his room. He thinks on the events of the past days, starting with the communication with Quick Ben. He intuits that relieving Kapustin probably isn't their primary goal, and that Kaladin Brood's army is probably much reduced after so many years of battle. He muses on possible exit strategies for his troops that would still honor the contract he made with Prince Jalarkan. Suddenly a tall Jaghut appears before him, introducing himself as Gethal, a herald of Hood. Hood, it seems, can no longer contact Finner directly, so he sent Gethal to offer the Grey Swords a way out of Kapustin if they agreed to help Hood in the approaching war between the gods. When Brukalian mentions his contract, Gethal is contemptuous, saying that Finner is soon going to fall, and that he should feel honored to be approached by Hood. Upon mentioning honor, Brukalian slashes Gethal across the face with his broadsword. Gethal draws his swords, but before he can strike, the 3 Tlan amass bonecasters appear on the edge of veering into their soul-taking forms. Gethal is pulled through a warren before they can attack. The bonecasters compliment Brukalian on his quick action, then disappear. Brukalian cleans his sword in the flames of his hearth. Despite it being a sanctified sword with its power unveiled, he only sees ashes. Gruntel awakens near Kapustin. Stani Menakes tells him that Harlow died during the attack along with Nitok. A young Kappan woman tells him he has been force-healed by the Grey Swords. Carolee appears, but Gruntel curses him and tells him to get out of his sight. His last thought is of Harlow jumping between him and the Cain Chamal. Chapter 8. Crippled God's Warren. Gethal crawls through a landscape of bones, his face ruined from Brukalian's strike. He comments on the irony of Hood sending him here, free to crawl away from his service, saying that he now knows who and what Hood is. He enters Amtos Felix and notices the warren seems to be dying. A fissure appears, where Gethal finds the crippled god. The crippled god tells him that Hood dismissed Gethal because of his desire to seek vengeance, something that would harm Hood's plans. The crippled god, on the other hand, welcomes personal ambition. He displays the deck of cards that Munich had painted for him, and declares he will enter the game. As the House of Chains, and offers Gethal the position of herald of the house. Gethal thinks he's a fool, and that the deck will fight him, but ultimately accepts. Kaladin broods camp. Murillo, Call, and Quick Ben are playing knuckles with Krupp and losing badly. Murillo suspects Krupp has some kind of sympathy with the bridge burners table. Quick Ben suspects he's cheating, as Krupp throws several impossible hands, but he can't detect anything with his warren. Whiskey Jack laughs, saying no one will ever figure Krupp out. Corlett appears and asks Whiskey Jack to accompany her to Animander Rake's tent. Still favoring his bad leg, Whiskey Jack makes his way to Rake's tent. Rake makes enigmatic observations about chance meetings, hope, and trust, and mentions Janot's Paran. Whiskey Jack offers to tell Animander Rake about Quick Ben's history. 7 cities had been in rebellion, led by a group called the 7 Holy Protectors. Dassam Alter led the sack of a city where one protector had been hiding, and killed him. The protector's cadre of 12 mages then fled into Raraku, and Whiskey Jack's company had been sent to pursue them. His company was comprised of 70 soldiers from various companies who had almost been wiped out, Fiddler, Hedge, and Picker amongst them. They were guided by Kalam Mekker, a 7 cities local who had recently joined the Claw. Along the way, they found the ravaged body of one of the mages in the cadre, who looked to have died a long time ago. The chase continued for weeks across the hostile landscape of Viraku, with another mage found dead every few days until there was only one left. Upon finding the last one, Quick Ben, it had turned out that he and Kalam had been in secret communication during the hunt, but that the pursuers had worked this out. Whiskey Jack guessed that each of the cadre mages allowed their souls and their powers to be shifted into Quick Ben's body to avoid death, giving him enormous power. Quick Ben told Whiskey Jack that the arduous trek across Viraku had burned the bridges of pasts. And they are yours, heart and soul. Whiskey Jack told him that whatever they experienced, Quick Ben and Kalam had shared as well. The 2 7 cities natives had then decided to follow Whiskey Jack. In their first assignment, the bridge burners took Danispan from 400 desert warriors in a single night. Animander Rake is amazed at the story, understanding why Quick Ben asked not to be probed. Rake tells Whiskey Jack that he was impressed with his defense of Silverfox, and that he won't move against her, and will instruct Collier to do the same. He promises to repay Whiskey Jack's tale with one of his own. Whiskey Jack departs, amazed at having made a friend. Crone comes to Rake's tent, telling him to be wary of making friends with short-lived races. He curtly tells her to bring Collier to his tent. He summons Corlett and tells her to guard Silverfox and place watchers on Collier. He gives her permission for the Teast-Andii to fully unveil their warrens in order to bring Collier down if need be. She is alarmed at this, given that 1100 Teast unveiling Cueld Galine might very well destroy the continent. He advises restraint, saying to be prepared simply as a precaution. The Maid dreams she is young again, thinking this a curse, not a blessing. In her dreams she sees footprints and thinks that flesh and blood amass have wandered into her dreams. She awakens in her tent, wishing to the spirits of the Rivi to end her life and the constant pain she has to endure as an old woman. Leaving her tent, Krupp appears with a box for her. During an attempt to expand the gaseous caves in Derohistan, chambers were found with altars and crude cave paintings. Upon these altars were copper adornments meant to look like flint. The adornments were made and worn by the spirits of the Rivi before they ascended. He tells her that wearing them will ease her pain. He leaves her to find something to eat, telling her to hold on to her faith, and that her dreams are a gift from that faith. As he leaves, she wonders at the hope he planted within her, and again at who might have been with her in her dreams. Barghast Range. Paran's company is going to meet up with the white-faced Barghast to try and form an alliance against the Panyan Daman. Trotz once had a high rank, and he can get them into Barghast territory unharmed, but he will probably have to fight a challenge or two. If he wins, the alliance is assured, but if he loses, the bridge burners might all die. Paran tells Ansi that his troop will be staying behind to wait for Quick Ben, who is busy. Ansi, worried at what might happen if Quick Ben doesn't show, calls for Spindle, who is examining what appears to be a tree planted upside down. Spindle, upon hearing the news, says that the Barghast spirits of the land are agitated with Trott's arrival. Perron talks with Twist, telling him he wants the Morinth to fly over them. He thinks on how Whiskey Jack is going to force the bridge burners into retirement after this war is done. He wonders if being killed en masse by the Barghast might not be a more merciful fate. Hood's Warren. Quick Ben is traveling between warrens, but finds that each of them is tainted by some kind of corruption. The corruption is similar to the crippled god, yet he's approaching the land of the Panyan Daman. He doesn't think this is a coincidence. Traveling into Hood's Warren, he notices the corruption isn't nearly as bad. He senses something peculiar, and finds a bundle of sticks and twigs with an acorn head in a field of clay with ancient wards scratched into its surface. The bundle of twigs is the stick snare once employed by Bauchelain, who tells Quick Ben his name is Talamandus. He says he was one of the first Barghast, and that the Barghast were once a mass, but were too far away to make it to the ritual of Telhan. He is bound to the earth, but was almost overthrown by Bauchelain who, had he succeeded, would have learned secrets forgotten even by the Barghast themselves. The Barghast were once seafaring a mass that traveled with the Thelamin Tablakai, and the upside-down trees at their barrow are meant to represent the dugout canoes they traveled in, and are part of the binding process. He needs to escape to give the Barghast spirits a chance to ascend in truth, and his people the chance at survival. Quick Ben offers to free him from his bindings in exchange for help in the war against the crippled god. He frees him with worms that feed on the salt in the clay, slowly breaking the wards by disrupting the writing. Talamandus asks who Quick Ben is, and he replies, "In the eyes of the gods, just a lowly saltworm." Chapter 9. Lamatath Plain. Tok the Younger walks with Lady Envy, noticing she seems more nervous since she visited Kalos. Their conversation wanders to the clan Amass, and Lady Envy tells Tok that the Amass have outlived their gods. With the Jag hut all but wiped out, what would be left for them? The gathering might be the end of the clan Amass, who would then have not a single spirit waiting to embrace all those weary souls. Tok hopes she is wrong because he considers Ono's Tulin his friend. This causes Tul to stop and stare. As they march on, Envy tells Tok that they are approaching the Panyan Daman's lands from the south, while the Malazan army and their allies are approaching from the north. Tok is dubious as to their chances of survival, but Envy shrugs his doubts away. When an undead Kel hunter appears, Tul insists that the Segula test their efficacy as they are on the borders of the Panyan Daman's lands. The three Segula make short work of the hunter, with Mok effortlessly decapitating it. Tul is shaken by this, and declares he needs to fight Mok, as the first sword of the clan Amass can have an equal. Tok tries to reassure him, but the duel is only stopped when Envy knocks Mok unconscious. Tul says she only postpones the inevitable. Near Bastion. The party arrives at a small hamlet outside of Bastion in the Daman's territory, with Tul traveling as Dust and Baljag magically disguised as a dog. They are brought into the village's main compound by an emaciated priest of the Panyan, and find the inner walls lined with impaled corpses. The priest tells them that the villagers have been delivered. Moving to a newly constructed Panyan temple, they find Sirdam Kalt in a dining hall with a meal prepared for them. He and Envy exchange veiled threats before he leaves them to their meal. As they eat, Envy tells Tok that the Panyan soldiers plan to kill them tonight, but tells Tok to go to bed anyway. Tok doesn't think he can sleep with such a certainty of violence. Tok awakens to a scream, finding that he had slept after all, probably due to sorcery. He hears claws clicking and finds Baljag and Gareth, who has now grown to an immense size. He finds Sirdam Kalt and several other soldiers drowned in a bath, having been boiled by Lady Envy's magic. The Segula, apart from Mok, have been killing the rest of the Panyan soldiers in the compound. Envy tells Tok to return to the compound as Gareth destroys the temple. Envy says their next move is to go to Bastion, and Tok thinks he won't survive the trip. Envy then grabs Tok and pulls him into a kiss, but stops, saying she'd rather he be free. Reaching a crossroads, Tok tells Envy that he thinks searching out answers to the rent at Morn is just an excuse for her to entertain herself by manipulating her traveling companions. She protests her innocence, but Tok doesn't believe her. Envy becomes petulant, saying Tok is acting just like Anamander Rake. Tok offers to tell her about how his mother was Cartharon Crust's sister, and his father, Tok the Elder, was initially reluctant to claim him as his own, given Crust's temper. Bastion. Tok's party arrives at Bastion only to find its fields burned and its people gone. As they enter the city, they smell cooking meat and realize that the survivors of whatever happened are eating the dead. They are greeted by Panyan priests who tell them their lives are in peril, but that they'll try and help them survive. The embrasure. One priest says that the embrasure was first felt 14 years ago, when the seer returned from the mountains. His words spread and the first child of the dead seed was born 9 months later. Upon Envy's inquiry, the priest reveals that the children of the dead seed result when women rape nearly dead warriors on the battlefield who then die during the act. Anaster, called the Glorious First, has recently come of age and now leads the Teniscauri. Tok notices Envy's visible discomfort at this news. The priest says that all who didn't join the faith in Bastion were rewarded, and then eaten by the Teniscauri. At that moment, a nearby mob appears to notice Tok's party. The priests flee, and the mob attacks. Envy directs Baljag and Gareth to slaughter them and awakens Mok. Tok takes this moment to flee and join the Teniscauri, as they'll eventually meet with the Malazan army. As he runs, he feels Envy's sorcery erupt. He finds a group of the starving peasant army and joins his screams to theirs. Chapter 10. Kapustin. Gruntle. Gruntle is slapped awake by Stani Manakis, who leaves in a huff when she realizes he's been binge drinking after learning of Harlow's death. Buke is there as well, and he tells Gruntle that the Panyan Daman army has effectively surrounded Kapustin and that they're going to be caught up in the ensuing fight. Buke tells him it is time to stop drinking and grieve. They walk to the barracks to see if Karnatas would be willing to heal Gruntle's hangover. As they walk, Buke says he's still in the employ of Bauchelain and Corbel Broach and that the city guards found their first murder victim last night. Buke claims it is important that the city guards not try to eject them, as they're powerful enough to destroy the city. On the other hand, they might prove valuable allies when the Panyan armies enter. Buke says he's trying to track Broach as he hunts his murder victims, and Gruntle says he should worry about outsmarting Bauchelain. Buke admits he needs help. They both agree to keep this from Stani. Itkovian comes down from the walls of Kapustin, having just seen the army arrayed before him, fully 80,000 well-trained and well-organized soldiers led by Septar Kulbeth, further enforced by at least 100,000 Teniscauri, and their children of the dead seed. Itkovian shares the fear he senses from the guardsmen on the wall. Meeting up with Hetan and Kafal, he learns that they plan to address the mass council with an introduction by Berkalian and Karnatas. As they walk to the council hall, Itkovian thinks on the inevitable fall of the city's walls and the ensuing battle that will occur street by street in the city. Berkalian says that the clan Amas will defend them against the Cain Chemal, but won't attack the human armies that approach. Finally, he says that Kaladin Brood's army will arrive in 6 weeks, and that they must hold out until then. Itkovian thinks this is impossible. Hetan maintains that the Barghast clans are still divided, so there truly is no hope for relief until Brood's army comes. At the council hall, it is revealed that the ground on which Kapustin was built is holy ground to the Barghast. In the past, the Barghast approached the masked council for a recognition as such and the rights to make pilgrimages. They were always turned down. With the Panyans approaching, Hetan demands that the remains of the first families be turned over to them. Itkovian thinks on the unification of the Barghast, and how Humbral Tor needs this to pull his armies together before the Panyans turn their eyes on him. Hetan's request is met with incredulity at first, but Wrath Queen of Dreams, Wrathhood, and Wrathburn know where the remains are. When the first Kappan and Dara settlers came to this land, they found barrows with bodies that looked more like Thelamin Tablakai. These remains were gathered up and buried beneath the floor of the council chamber. As the workers dismantle the floor, Rathfiner approaches the 3 grey swords and tells them that Trake is dead, yet Rathtrake seems more energetic than ever. He guesses this to be an attempt at ascendancy, saying that this threatens Finnur's place as the god of war. Itkovian tells Karnatas to depose Rathfiner and take his place on the masked council. Karnatas refuses. The floor is torn up, revealing 9 dugout canoes and 60 bodies. Kafal tells Itkovian that the ancient Barghast spirits have at last found their powers. Gruntle. Stani Menakes is at the Grey Swords barracks, sparring with a young female recruit. When she sees Gruntle, she insists he visit Carolee with her, and thank him for saving his life. She says that when the Kell hunters attacked, Carolee snatched their souls away into a dream world, causing the hunters to ignore them, as they seemed already dead. Stani further explains that Carolee serves an elder god who doesn't collect worshippers, but friends, and that she is his. They walk to Carolee's estate where Gruntle apologizes and thanks him. Carolee in turn gives Gruntle a small clay bird to give to Buke. He says he must grind the bird into powder and drink it, or else his quarry will elude him. Gruntle takes it, though he's somewhat suspicious, and then leaves. Carolee tells Stani to stay close to Gruntle, as the time is approaching for him to take a difficult path. Itkovian and Kafal are inspecting the recently unearthed canoes and notice that each one has a carving that features the Barghast fighting the same enemy. Kafal names them Tisinuar, the gray-skinned demons that would take their enemies' heads, yet keep them alive to work endlessly. He said that his ancestors fought them in the blue wastes, which he now understands to be the sea. Itkovian guesses that Tisinuar probably referred to the Teast Eater, who are oft mentioned in Dread. They also discuss how the Barghast are related to the Morinth, yet neither gets along with the other. Itkovian speaks with Bukalian, who asks that Itkovian escort the Barghast and find out if they have a plan to extract their ancestors' remains from the city. He says to use any means necessary. They are approached by Rathtrake, who mentions Trake's sudden ascendancy, and how Funner has named a Destrian for the first time in 1,000 years. He warns them of a war between the gods of war, and that Rathfunner is no friend to the Grey Swords. Itkovian departs, more shaken than ever. Chapter 11. Vision Plain. The Bridgeburners' 7th Squad, led by Sergeant Ansi, is waiting on the steps for the return of Quick Ben while the remainder of the Bridgeburners go on to meet the white-faced Barghast. They are not coping well with the boredom, with Spindle's hair shirt catching fire, Deteran breaking Hedge's jaw, Mallet suffering debilitating sunburns, and Picker having to keep the peace while Ansi frets over small details. At one point, Mallet tells Picker that he is having a hard time using his warren, and that the sunburn might actually be a physical manifestation of the foulness infecting it. Glenn talks with Picker about how Onurm's host might not be outlawed, pointing out that the standard bearer, Artanthos, showed up immediately after the outlawry was announced. Quick Ben steps out of Hood's path, sick from the corruption affecting all of the Warrens. He thinks that the Panionseer is probably just a pawn, an opening gambit used by the crippled god to test the efficacy of his enemies. The poisoning of the Warrens is probably another feint to distract everyone from the growing threat. Spying Ansi's camp, Quick Ben determines that they need to take the pawn down fast. Barghast Camp. Janoz Paran and the rest of the Bridgeburners have arrived at the Barghast camp. Many clans have gathered under the banner of the White-Faced Nation to witness a duel that Trotz will fight to be recognized as a clan leader. Everywhere he looks, minor duels are being fought over petty feuds and rivalries. Speaking with Twist, Paran learns that a young, nameless son of the White-Faced war leader, Humbral Tor, will be fighting in the duel. Paran asks Twist to go retrieve someone for him with his quarrel. The duel is fought the next morning in a ceremonial circle. A corporal named Aimless warns Paran that some of the Bridgeburners are nervous at the prospect of a fight with the Barghast, and are ready to blow their way out using a cache of Morinth munitions. Paran tells them to calm down, and wait for his word. Trotz surprises everyone by fighting in full Malazan armor, using basic infantry tactics with shield and broadsword. The unnamed son fights with a hook knife, trying to use feints and dodges to little effect. After an exchange of blows, the son slices through Trotz's shield arm, but loses his knife hand to Trotz's sword. The son then crushes Trotz's throat with his fingers, but Trotz disembowels him. Both fall. Before Paran can react, a minor cutter named Mulch performs a tracheotomy, allowing Trotz to breathe. Mulch says it's temporary, and they need Mallet. Just then, Twist arrives with Mallet in tow. The first landing. As Ansi's squad marches towards the Barghast encampment, Quick Ben is pulled underground by the Barghast spirits. He finds himself in the company of Talamandas again, and a host of warriors who look more like Thelemantablakai than Barghast. Talamandas tells him that he tried meeting up with his clan, but the shoulder men rejected him as the younger, more comforting spirits already in attendance fear the Ancient One's power. He tells Quick Ben that the remains of the founding families have been found by Humbral Tor's children, but that the remains are stuck in Kapustin. Quick Ben does not think Humbral Tor would believe him even if he told him, but asks if the spirits could manifest themselves in another sorcerer, implying Mallet. Talamandas agrees. Barghast camp. Mallet tells Piran that using his warrant to heal Trots will probably kill him, but agrees to it anyway as it will save the lives of everyone else in the bridge burners. As he opens his Denul warren, he feels himself being torn apart and bleeding, but suddenly finds himself surrounded by the Barghast spirits who offer him their power to protect him from the foulness. He feels himself being remade and proceeds to heal Trots. When Piran finds out, he tells Humbral Tor, who in turn tells Piran that the bridge burners are still in danger. Several other powerful clan chiefs are suspicious of all Malazans, afraid that they will come to conquer them after the Panyan Daman is defeated. He maintains that no one will follow him to Kapustin, and he needs to keep the clans united if they are to withstand the Panyans after Kapustin falls. Trots is now recognized as a clan chief with the bridge burners as his clan. Piran exits Humbral Tor's tent to find Picker and Blend waiting for him. They tell him that Quick Ben is unconscious after his encounter with the Barghast spirits. Piran goes to him, along with Trots and Mallet, who brings Quick Ben around by slapping him. Quick Ben learns of Humbral Tor's position and tells him that he has information that will make Kapustin important to all the clan chiefs. The three of them go into Tor's tent along with Twist. Picker and Blend are left to wonder at the state of their troop. If an attack were to transpire that night, no one would be ready to mount a defense as most of the bridge burners are either drunk or in the middle of a tryst with a Barghast. The next morning, Quick Ben tells Piran that the Barghast spirits are finally reunited with the living clan members. None of the shoulder men will be able to deny Humbral Tor's call to march on Kapustin. They speak about how Trots is now the de facto leader of the bridge burners given his position amongst the Barghast, and that Piran must teach him how to be a commander. Piran thinks that nobody with a heart can live with the pressures of command. Chapter 12. Outlook. Tak the Younger has been marching with the Teniskauri for 3 weeks after the events in Bastion. Electing not to speak, Tak has gained a semblance of notoriety amongst the Teniskauri as having a particularly perceptive eye, some guessing that he communes directly with the Panyan seer. He is noticed by Anister, who takes him into his inner circle of lieutenants. Tak makes several observations. The armies are followed by massive, ensorcelled condors. The lieutenants and Anister are always well fed, eating those Teniskauri who die from hunger, and Anister's mother frightens Tak more than anyone else in the army, even more than the seer. Despite having starved to the point of emaciation, Tak refuses to eat human flesh, but he feels his resolve crumbling. Tak thinks about how the Panyans have been sending soldiers to the south to deal with Envy, Tool, and the Segula. Entire regiments have been wiped out, along with the undead Cain Chamal, who are often taken down by Gareth and Bailjag. Tak thinks that the seer is getting nervous as the flashes of Envy's sorcery appear to be getting closer. As the army reaches Outlook, a fort in the mountains, Anister tells his lieutenants that the Panyan seer requests to see Tak in person. Tak is forced to crawl up a flight of stairs, finding horrifying reminders of the seer's cruelty along the way. When he at last meets the seer, he sees an old man's corpse on a chair, but behind him there's a man-shaped figure, speaking through the dead body. The seer casts a healing spell on Tak that mends the damage done by weeks of starvation, but slowly to avoid the mental trauma of force healing. The seer tells him he has a wolf's eye, and offers him an unknown meat, which Tak, possessing a wolf's senses, can identify as venison. The seer questions him about Endy's party. Tak denies knowing them, and the seer says he'll need to stop them himself. Tak suddenly sees out of Bailjag's eyes. The weather turns to sleet and hail, and ice begins forming on the ground. Tool and Envy talk about how this resembles Jag Hut magic, and that an alliance between the Jag Hut and the cane chainmail is unthinkable. Neither tool nor envy can nullify the magic affecting the weather, and are forced to march on, enduring the icy winds. Back in the seer's quarters, Tok notices that the creature controlling the dead human is indeed a jaghut, but that gray tendrils wrap around him leading down to feed on another, more deadly source of power than Amtos Felik. The seer knows of Tok's vision through Baaljag's eyes and accuses him of trying to assassinate him in a bid for the throne of the beast's hold. For a brief moment, Tok sees a child screaming, "You lied!" before pain grips him and he finds himself in a dark room with a massive figure. The seer tells Tok that this is the cane chainmail matron that was once imprisoned in the rent at Morn. Driven mad by the endless years of pain and the loss of her children, she clings to Tok with an insane need. Her attention shatters Tok's bones, but the healing spell persists, causing Tok's bones to knit back together only to be shattered again by the matron. The seer promises Tok he'll keep him alive for as long as he wants. Held so tightly, Tok cannot scream, hearing only the mad whimpering of his captor. Chapter 13. Vision Plain. Whiskey Jack approaches the Mybe, who has been having nightmares of a faceless menace pursuing her. He asks her of it, and she says that it is death coming for her. He tries to reassure her, but she curses him for it. He later appeals to Corlett, who tells him that Silverfox has withdrawn from their company. Silverfox is now feeding on the Mybe's life force in earnest, but at the same time she feels abandoned by her mother. Whiskey Jack talks to Silverfox, who is being guarded by 2 female Marines. He tells her she brings her isolation upon herself, but she dismisses this, thinking it to be the natural way of things for leaders such as them. Just then, the Trigol Trade Guild arrives with supplies for the army. Their entrance is dramatic, as a deluge of blood from an elder god gushes from the warren they use. They confirm that the warrens are poisoned. Collier sits on his old throne while burning a century candle, which helps relieve some of the effects of old age. He thinks on the irony that the crippled god was summoned to get rid of him, yet a millennium later, he is now a more dire threat than Collier ever was. Gethal suddenly appears, and tells Collier that High House Chains is newly formed in the deck of dragons, and that they need a king. Collier is dismissive at first, thinking that the house will be assailed and that he will have to bend the knee to the crippled god. Gethal assures him that the House of Chains operates independently of the crippled god. Collier agrees on the terms that the crippled god provide him an opportunity to strike at Silverfox. Whiskey Jack is feeling more tired than he has in a long time when he is approached by Corlett. They speak on the relationship of mutual respect formed between the bridge burners and the Teast Endii during the time of Black Dog Forest. He mentions finding a dead squad of Teast Endii, and how the bridge burners buried them in the Malazan style, and that the only valuables they had on their person were knotted pieces of colored cloth and small pebbles. Corlett invites him to her tent, saying she wishes to start a relationship with him. They speak briefly on how Teast Endii find little joy or companionship with others of their kind, and that children often result from boredom more than anything else. Whiskey Jack maintains that he is honored by her offer, and produces several knotted pieces of colored cloth and small pebbles, saying he kept them to honor the Teast Endii. The Mybe dreams she is being carried through the air by an undead dragon. After it releases her and has flown away, an unseen voice speaks to her. Answering her question, it tells her we're here and that she will see them when she is ready. The voice tells her that Krupp visited Silverfox in her dreams to chastise her for leaving the Mybe to her fate. His words stop Silverfox from obsessing with herself, they say. When asked if she would see them, the Mybe panics and wakes up in her tent, weeping and cursing the gods. Chapter 14. Kapustin. Gruntle waits for the siege of Kapustin in a local bar. He notices how half of the clientele seems sullen and listless while the other half is living recklessly in the face of impending death. The Panyan Daman have waited for several days while more and more Taniskauri arrive. The city is now surrounded by more than 250,000 Panyan soldiers. Buick arrives, disappointed at Gruntle's presence in a bar, though he thanks him for delivering the bird that Carolee gave him. The elders in the camps had initially wanted to go to the prince when informed by Buick about the danger Korbel Broach posed, but took to keeping the streets clear of victims instead. Gruntle applauds their efforts at keeping the panic in the city down, but is convinced they'll all die anyway. Buke mentions that Stani Manakes is still planning on fighting, and that Gruntle would do well to guard her back. Gruntle insists that this isn't their fight, and that Stani is free to make her own choices and live with the consequences. Gruntle goads Buke by implying he, Gruntle, would join the Teniskauri and eat human flesh to escape. Itkovian watches Hetan and Kafal speak with their spirits through arcane arts. He thinks about Berkelian's orders to discover how they plan to move the remains of their ancestors. By whatever means. Even if it means breaking his vows of chastity. He's interrupted by Prince Jalarkin, who presses him for information about the clan Amass and the army led by Kaladin Brood and Dijek One-Arm. Itkovian admits that the Grey Swords kept information from him, but only because they deemed it unimportant. The Malaz Second Army numbers only 10,000 and Brood's mercenaries number 30,000, and they are still 5 weeks distant. With the fall of Kapustin inevitable, Jalarkin suggests they take the citizens and flee. Itkovian assures him that any attempt to escape would fail. Jalarkin leaves, but not before angrily telling him to keep him informed. Hetan notices Itkovian, who makes an abortive attempt at seducing her. He flees to the roof of the barracks and meets with Karnadas, to whom he admits he is struggling with the vows he made to Finner. Karnadas reveals to him that Finner required no vows of abstinence, rather Itkovian needed something to chain him to his beliefs. Karnadas makes a few bawdy jokes at Itkovian's expense, but is interrupted when they see movement in the Panyan camps. Itkovian summons his messenger corps and remains on the roof while Karnadas goes below. Gruntle finds Buke in a walled-off camp. They discuss their attempts at keeping Korbelbroch at bay, and both realize that it's only a matter of time before he or Bochlane begin to question the sudden lack of victims. Buke makes another attempt to get Gruntle to look after Stani, but they're interrupted with the sounds of ballistae striking the walls. Gruntle leaves, maintaining it's not their war. As he leaves, a flaming projectile strikes the camp. Buke tells him to run and hide. Gruntle leaves, reluctantly heading to where Stani was stationed with the Grey Swords. The flaming projectiles are hitting the middle of the city, and Gruntle hears battle all around him. He comes to a crossroads and finds a street littered with corpses from both sides of the battle. Joining with the Grey Swords temporarily, he runs into Stani Manakes, who is covered in gore, her rapier broken and her armor in tatters. She vaguely recounts the breach of the walls, and Gruntle realizes she was raped by a Seerdaman. He comforts her and carries her to his room, saying he'll guard the door. He thinks how killing 1,000 Seerdaman won't be enough after this. Itkovian remains on the barracks rooftop, commanding the defense of the city through a corps of messengers. Things seem to be unfolding as he had predicted. The defense is causing the Panyans to lose thousands of soldiers, but they still breach the walls by sheer weight of numbers. Upon breaching the walls, Itkovian's strategy of street-by-street contraction works with brutal efficiency, but he knows it's only a matter of time before they're overrun. Karnadas appears and tells him that Berkelian has been summoned to the thrall to give a report to the masked council on the state of the battle. Karnadas heals Itkovian of his fatigue, saying the poison in the warren will soon be more than he can handle. He asks Itkovian if he's made any progress in finding out what the Barghast plan to do with their ancestors' remains. Itkovian admits he hasn't, and probably won't get a chance. Karnadas leaves for the thrall while Itkovian maintains his vigil over the battle. Karnadas arrives at the thrall and meets Berkelian, but they are preceded by a priest, Karoli, who demands to be allowed onto the masked council as Wrath Krull. The council reacts strongly, some saying the age of Krull has ended. Karoli tells them they have no choice, saying that he finds their representation of the gods to be inadequate. He warns that someone on the council will betray them all. Karnadas cannot help but suspect Rathfinner. Gruntle comforts Stani in his room. She tells him to go and fight the Panyans, calling him the best fighter she's ever seen. He puts on his armor and his large twin cutlasses and sets off. Itkovian watches the battle and concludes it's not going well. Through the fires plaguing the city, he notices that the stone of the prince's palace is somehow resisting the projectiles thrown at it, and the Panyans seem eager to take it level by level. One of his veteran commander arrives, and he orders him to take his troops outside of the city walls to neutralize the enemy's catapults. Itkovian thinks that while the commander needs no inspiring words before embarking on a likely suicidal mission, Itkovian yearns for such reassurance. A messenger appears and tells him that the Erdemen who had taken the North Gate are all dead, wiped out by a militia led by a citizen. The Grey Swords were making repairs when the survivors of the militia went off to engage more Erdemen. Itkovian sends a platoon to aid him, then the veteran commander leaves. The members of the masked council accuse Carolee of sowing mistrust. Carolee reassures them, saying that the traitor will doubtless be dealt with by his own god. Hedin asks him if he will truly aid them, and Kafal volunteers to be put into a magical sleep by Carolee, who warns all present not to wake him. Bukalion and Karnatas excuse themselves to rejoin Itkovian. Gruntle now leads 12 fighters, aided by a guard from Lastari House, a well-fortified private residence that has become a strong point of resistance against the invaders. They had just finished wiping out a mob of Skalandi soldiers when the Lastari guardsman points to the thrall, which is now glowing with sorcery. Gruntle sees that whilst the North Gate is being held by the Grey Swords, the West Gate has fallen, meaning the chain of command has probably broken down. He tells his remaining troop that they're all sergeants now, and that the Lastari guardsman is a lieutenant. He tells them they're going to take command of the defense. The battle seems to be diminishing, but Itkovian notes that the West Gate is open, with enemy troops pouring in. However, the defense suddenly stiffens and the enemy is stopped. A messenger arrives, horribly burnt, and explains that when he arrived at the West Gate, the defense was in tatters. He was going to report back when a foreigner appeared and rallied the nearby camps. The foreigner held the remains of a child who had been partially eaten by the Panyans. Making a standard out of the child's tunic, he led around 500 camp dwellers and rallied the defenders. The last the messenger saw of him, the foreigner was leading a sortie to meet a troop of Beklites. He says that the foreigner wields 2 cutlasses and fights like a boar. Another messenger arrives and tells him that the Teniskauri are on the move. Itkovian orders Karnatas to open a series of tunnels which they constructed to hide the citizens of Kapustin. Karnatas notes the protective sorcery surrounding the thrall, and tells Itkovian that Carolee, the merchant Itkovian rescued on the plains, was responsible. He recalls healing his caravan guard, a large man wielding cutlasses. Itkovian says that Bukalion and the foreigner need to be warned about the Teniskauri. Gruntle's militia has just finished crushing the Betaklite company. The Lestari sergeant warns him that a cavalry charge is coming, but Gruntle tells him they're simply masking the Teniskauri. They strip armor from the Betaklites and fall back behind the city walls. As his company arrives, Gruntle notices how all the Grey Swords busy repairing the walls fall silent as he arrives. One soldier comes forward and offers the services of weaponsmiths to sharpen and repair his cutlasses, which she calls tusks. When she is offended by his jokes on that, he tells her to call them tiger claws. Another soldier comes forward and warns him, unnecessarily, about the Teniskauri. He tells Gruntle about the tunnels, and asks where Gruntle and his militia would like to fight. Gruntle chooses to fight near the tenement where Stani is residing, saying he'll fight room by room once the streets are overrun. Itkovian agrees to send him food, but flinches when he hears the Lestari lieutenant refer to Gruntle's cutlasses as tiger claws. Itkovian realizes that Trake walks in Gruntle's shadow, and can't help but think that the ascension of Trake might bode ill for Fënir. He mutters a prayer and rides to meet the Teniskauri. Buke is at the compound with Bauchelain, Corbel Broach, and Emanciparis. He notes how Panyan troops made it to the house while he was helping camp dwellers to the tunnels, but were killed by Kapustin's defenders. He is just about to leave for good, he thinks, when Bauchelain steps out. As they chat, Buke looks at the scattered remains of an Erdeman troop clearly killed by sorcery. Bauchelain says this is a good thing, and reveals he knows about Buke's attempts to keep Corbel Broach from killing. He also notes Carolee's sorcery now flowing in Buke's body, but tells him not to use it as they don't enjoy company when in their soul-taken forms. The dead Erdeman stand, and Emanciparis comes out, babbling that Corbel Broach had taken their hearts and sewn them together in his laboratory. Bauchelain tells Buke he now has guards to command. He also mentions the children of the dead seed, and how Corbel wants to experiment on Annister. They intend on reaching him by veering into 2 rooks. Buck, after having drunk Carolee's gift, can now veer into a sparrow hawk, and is able to fly much more quickly and with more agility than the 2 rooks. Emancipatrice thinks he's a fool for assuming he's safe. Buck veers and follows Bauchelain and Corbel, who attack Annister's company with sorcery. They are fought off with chaotic magic, causing Buck to screech in triumph. He races back to the compound and orders the guards into position. Bauchelain and Corbel arrive with their clothes still smoking from the conflict. Buck allows himself a small laugh. Bauchelain goes inside, somewhat at a loss, while Corbel continues to stamp at his smoldering clothing. Chapter 15. Vision Plain. Whiskey Jack accompanies a dozen Rivi scouts to a site of giant bones. They seem to be reptilian in nature, but wearing armor and wielding swords. The Rivi babble incomprehensibly about giant wolves and the stench of graves. The leader of the scouts says that demons were killed by giant wolves who are like those that run in the Rivi dreams, in the realm of their shaman. Corlett, Silverfox, and Krupp arrive, and Whiskey Jack notes that Silverfox has now grown into an attractive woman. Corlett identifies the reptilian bones as Cain Chemal Kell hunters. Silverfox reveals that the giant wolves were Tlanai. She whispers the name, causing a huge cloud of dust to swirl and thousands of Tlanai appear about the valley. Silverfox calls them simply her escort, but Whiskey Jack has the uneasy feeling that she has gone beyond the need of their protection, and that perhaps Collier was right. Is she now so powerful that she could turn on her allies? He knows that Tattersall never would, but doubts the other souls residing within her. Could the feelings of betrayal that Nightchill held towards Tashern be extended to the rest of the Malazan Empire, or even Kaladin Brood and Animander Rake? Silverfox asks Corlett to check on the Mybe, saying that she shouldn't go near, lest the Tlanai frighten her. Krupp approves. Silverfox gestures and the Tlanai return to dust. Whiskey Jack wonders at the secret communication between them and is worried that too many secrets are being held in this alliance. The 4 return to the main column and discuss the findings with Dijek One-Arm, Brood, and Collier, who seems to know a lot about the Cain Chemal. He mentions the scholars from Jakuruku, before he destroyed it, found ruins of a modern city with technological and sorcerous marvels that outpaced anything found in today's civilization. He said that the Cain Chemal were led by matrons who could magically give birth to a variety of offspring meant for specific tasks. The Kell hunters were born with swords for arms, and were bred specifically for battle. At one point, however, the matron sought to resurrect an ancient breed his scholars called Short Tails, who then caused a civil war which ultimately led to their complete extinction. The sorcery unleashed was apocalyptic, and at some point, one matron tried to harness the power of a gate to the Warren of Chaos, which created the Rent at Morn. These new Cain Chemal are undead, but are being commanded by something, which means the matron must be alive and most likely under the control of the Panyan Seer. Collier sees that someone has destroyed these hunters, and accuses Silverfox of knowing more than she's letting on. She says that the Tlanai masts are joining the fight, and their reasons run parallel with their reasons for warring with the Jag Hut. The Jag Hut, Silverfox explains, were willing to allow the Amass to live independently until the tyrants arose. The ensuing generations of slavery left scars that ran so deep. The ritual of Telan was taken to ensure no Jag Hut were left from which could rise new tyrants. This is important, she says, because before the Jag Hut ruled, the Cain Chemal ruled. She suspects that the Cain Chemal are the power behind the Panyan Seer. A matron lives again, and the Jag Hut would be as nothing compared to the tyranny of the Cain Chemal. She says that dealing with that threat will be the sacrifice of the Tlanai mass. Collier says that she lies, and that this battle is no more than a feint, but refuses to say more. Heradas, a mage from the Trigull Trade Guild, says that a feint makes sense, given the poisoning of the Warrens. She says that the Panyans and the Cain Chemal might all be unwittingly manipulated by an unseen third power. Silverfox says that the Tlanai mass cannot fight this final unseen enemy. Whiskey Jack is horrified, thinking that they are heading to their deaths when Krupp interrupts everything by saying that he will stand between them and the unknown enemy. This causes Kaladin Brood to explode in anger, demanding that Krupp provide proof of his claim to be able to stand up against the crippled god, raising Byrne's hammer in threat. Krupp scoffs at his threats and his demands, and defies him to try. Kaladin Brood slams his hammer down, causing an earthquake which knocks Whiskey Jack off his horse, breaks the earth into lava-streaked crevasses, and raises a small mountain range at the edge of the valley. Whiskey Jack looks up and sees Krupp, unharmed, on an island in the midst of the flowing lava. Hearing a cry, he sees Corlett looking over a fissure in the earth, and sees it filling with foul blood. He realizes the poison affecting Byrne must be the crippled god. The Maid wakes up in her wagon as the impact of Brood's hammer reverberates throughout the camp. She hears Call and Murillo talking about what just happened, unsurprised that Krupp was involved. Thinking the Maid asleep, Murillo waxes nostalgic about his youthful days sleeping with widows. Now that he's aged, he realizes that new, young libertines are soon to take his place. And whilst he looks back and sees wastefulness, he still recognizes that he had his time of glory while the Maid, now resembling a very old woman, has none. Call points out that the Maid is awake. Murillo apologizes, but the Maid thinks to herself that the only time people are honest with her is when they think she is asleep. She doesn't answer them, and slips into her dream world of a treeless yellow wasteland. Dujek storms into a tent with Whiskey Jack, incensed at how he's been deceived by Brood and Rake, who clearly knew the crippled god was involved in this war. He says the Malazans were prepared to fight a human empire, not an evil god. Whiskey Jack says the Malazan army shouldn't shift their focus from the Panyans, and that Brood and Rake will probably take care of the crippled god as they were there for the chaining. He also points out that the Malazans have done their share of deception and manipulation. Dujek calms down. Whiskey Jack says that he has faith in Krupp and whatever elder god he is involved with, citing the events in Duruhustan. Someone was working behind the scenes in Duruhustan, manipulating circumstances, and it was not the Torrid Cabal, or Vorkan Radak, but Krupp. The fact that Silver Fox possesses the souls of 3 Malazans inside the body of a Rivi has bridged the gap between all factions, minus Collier, again the work of Krupp. This latest demonstration by Kaladin Brood, he thinks, was contrived by Krupp simply to remind Collier of Brood's power. The elder god probably chose Krupp because he is, perhaps, the smartest man in the world. Dujek can hardly believe it, and still doesn't enjoy this feeling of helplessness. Whiskey Jack assures him that Quick Ben probably already knows all about the crippled god, and is nearly Krupp's equal in intelligence. Artanthos enters the tent to say that Twist has arrived. Whiskey Jack and Dujek exit the tent, eager for news of the bridge burners. The Maid dreams she is being chased by wolves. At first she flees quick as an antelope, outrunning the wolves for miles. However, the wolves eventually tire her out, and surround her. Just when she thinks she is about to be killed and eaten, she wakes up. Corlett arrives with stew, and sits with her to eat. The Maid mentions the 2 female Marines that have spoken to her about Silver Fox, and how they are the only ones who bring her news anymore. Corlett is surprised to hear this, and the Maid takes this as a sign that she disapproves. The Maid accuses Corlett of being part of a conspiracy to keep her in the dark and forcing her to continue living despite her wishes. The Maid becomes angry, asking about Silver Fox, and how she has not seen her for days. Corlett, in an attempt to reassure the Maid, tells her of the Tlanai. The Maid reacts with terror, scratching Corlett's face and raving that the wolves and her daughter are trying to kill her. Corlett finds Whiskey Jack and accuses him of hiding things from her. She demands that he tells her what he ordered his Marines to do, and why they have caused the Maid to react so fearfully. Whiskey Jack says the 2 Marines were given no orders, and that he has no idea why the Maid should fear the Tlanai. He believed that Corlett knew, but did not feel the need to ask. Corlett calms down, and as Whiskey Jack cleans her scratches, she tells him that the Malazans have become the backbone to this army. Whiskey Jack denies this, saying that the Malazans are simply soldiers, and that they all feel overwhelmed by the Immortals and Ascendants comprising Brood's army. Corlett suspects that Silver Fox might be giving the Maid bad dreams. Whiskey Jack does not think so, as it is not something Tattersail would do. But neither he nor Corlett can be sure if Tattersail is the one in charge. The two go to find a healer. Krupp wanders through the camp and finds the two Marines guarding Silverfox. He offers them Nathii black cakes, which reminds them of the war in Black Dog Forest, and they chat about Silverfox, Whiskey Jack, and the Malazan Empire. The two Marines say that Whiskey Jack was crucial to stopping the bloodshed after Lazine took the throne, but the Empire would have been better off had he killed her and taken her place. After a time, Krupp leaves. The two Marines decide that Krupp and Silverfox are planning something to ease the Mibe's pains. Krupp finds Call and Murillo, who tell him that the Mibe is suffering from heartbreak. Krupp assures them that plans are already in effect to help her, but that she must take her own journey of the spirit before being told those plans. Crone arrives at camp to give a report to Kaladin Brood. Anamander Rake has successfully hidden Moon's spawn, and Kapustin will not hold despite the best efforts of the defenders. Crone mentions that something unusual is happening to the south. The seer wages a war with an unknown enemy, and is unleashing Amtos Felak. Brood is not surprised, but does not know who the seer's enemies to the south could be. Crone doesn't know if the Panyan seer is still in Outlook, as the ensorcelled condors prevent her and the other great ravens from getting too close. This concerns Brood. Crone asks for food and is offered the scraps in the rubbish heap. On her way out, she mocks Brood for losing his temper. When he reacts angrily, Crone flees. Chapter 16. Kapustin. The Tenniscauri have overrun the city of Kapustin, climbing on top of each other, and dying by the score. Itkovian sees some of the women raping the dead and dying, and others eating their fallen comrades. Itkovian is struck with disgust and hatred at the Panyan seer for doing this to his people, and frustrated because it seems to be working. Riding a warhorse, he wades into the fray, killing more people than he ever has before. At one point, he sees his grey swords physically swallowed by the mass of Tenniscauri, and realizes that he's fighting on top of a veritable sea of corpses. Accepting his impending death, he says a prayer to Finner, and orders his warhorse to go on the attack. Both he and his horse receive grievous wounds, but he slowly notices the horse is moving towards a clearing in the battle. Upon arriving at the clearing, sees that many of his grey swords survived. He meets Berkalion and Carnadas, and asks to have his soldiers and horse healed before passing out. Gruntle watches as the Panyan soldiers flee the tenement building he chose as his fighting ground. He doesn't feel tired or hurt, and his appearance has changed. His eyes are a pale yellow, and stripes have appeared on his face. His militia, now numbering 100, fight with newfound abilities and seem to be able to communicate with him nonverbally. He barricades hallways and staircases with dead Panyans, and tells his Lestari lieutenant that they're going to retreat to the next floor. The Lestari looks at him, and proclaims him Trake's mortal sword. Gruntle doesn't respond, but watches as his militia strips armor from the dead and begin to retreat to the next floor. Berkalion watches Carnadas and his assistants carry Itkovian away to see to his wounds. As they operate, Berkalion notices how the use of the poisoned warren has ravaged Carnadas' body. He doesn't think he'll survive the night. Itkovian's forced healing will leave a mental scar, but it must be done. The grey swords have been all but destroyed, and Kapustin has fallen. A messenger arrives, a young Kappan woman, who tells him that Rathfinner has invoked Finis Reve, and demands that Berkalion come to the thrall and rescue him. He asks how Rathfinner was able to get a message to her, and indeed how she herself was able to cross Kapustin unmolested. She doesn't know. Berkalion asks if she would like to go with them. When she says yes, he changes his mind and tells her to stay behind and tell Itkovian where he's going. Nobanas, an older veteran of the Grey Swords, tells Berkalion that going to the thrall would mean their deaths, and that Rathfinner has betrayed them. Berkalion knows, but wants to go anyway. Without their deaths, Rathfinner would have committed no crime, and he must be punished for betraying their god's commands. Berkalion assures Nobanas that Itkovian will avenge them, and this satisfies Nobanas. Berkalion marshals 400 grey swords to answer Rathfinner's invocation. When they reach the clearing around the thrall, they are surrounded by Seerdamin, Erdamin, and Betaclites, all led by Septarch Kulpith. Nobanas roars his defiance and begins to dance, momentarily freezing Kulpith, who then orders his archers to shoot. Itkovian awakes and has a preternatural vision of the slaughter of Berkelian's troops. He sees Nilbana's cut down by arrows, and Berkelian's sword burning with sorcerous fire. Berkelian's enchanted sword continues incinerating the Panion soldiers even as he is cut apart. As he dies, the sword explodes, killing yet more. Itkovian and the Panions all pause to see an apparition of Hood appear to claim Berkelian's soul. Itkovian feels Rathfina's presence in the vision, and tells him, "You are mine, betrayer! Mine!" Björk flies above Kapustin. The compound owned by Bauchelain and Corbel Broach is littered with bodies, many of whom are now undead soldiers for Corbel Broach. 3 times the Panions attacked, but each time Bauchelain's sorcery or Corbel Broach's undead warriors drove them back. Björk sees cook fires, where the Tenascauri have begun cooking what people they could find. He flies to the tenement where Gruntel is fighting, and he sees that bodies litter the streets so high he can't see the ground. The tenement itself is virtually solid, packed with still bleeding corpses to the point where the building won't burn. Björk can't bring himself to face Gruntel, changed as he is after this siege. He flies away. Itkovian is still on his cot, Karnatas holding his hand. He isn't fully healed, but disguises the extent of his remaining injuries from Karnatas. Karnatas looks skeletal, his grip weak, and he tells Itkovian that he is finished as he dies. Itkovian sees the young Kappan woman and asks for a report. 137 grey swords survive, most of them recruits, the barracks are burning, and they've had no contact with Jalarkin's palace. The Kappan asks to be punished for sending Berkelian to his death. Itkovian assures her that Berkelian knew what was coming, and she bears no responsibility. He requests an armorer to bind his still injured knee and shoulder and makes ready to depart with the words, "We are not yet done here. I am not yet done." The remaining grey swords march to Jalarkin's palace. The streets are empty near Jalarkin's palace. No sign of intruders or defenders can be found, not even bodies. Entering the throne room, he finds Anaster and his mother along with several Tenascauri. They have killed Jalarkin, roasted and eaten him, and nailed his skin to a cross. Anaster mockingly invites Itkovian to join the feast, saying he knows about the tunnels. Itkovian's captain reveals the purpose of the shield anvil, a mortal soul chosen to bear the grief of the world on behalf of his god. When Itkovian offers to take Anaster's despair, Anaster reacts with gibbering terror, saying that Itkovian cannot have it. Itkovian realizes that within Anaster, there is nothing but despair. Without it, he would be nothing. 40 Seerdamen enter the room, but the grey sword kills them. Anaster and his mother escape. Ordering his soldiers to take down Jalarkin's corpse and skin, Itkovian declares that they will hold the throne room in honor of the prince. Chapter 17. Outlook. Tok the Younger has been tortured constantly for weeks at the hands of the matron. As she crushes him in her arms, the healing spell the Panion seer cast heals his bones swiftly, sometimes unevenly. He's now deformed and slowly losing his mind. He sees visions of Tool, the Segula, and Lady Envy fighting their way through fields of ice and snow, but he thinks they're only delusions. When he dreams of being a wolf, running with a pack and hunting something. Not to eat it, but to deliver something to it. Tok doesn't know what it is. In his dream, they corner their quarry, but it suddenly disappears before they can deliver what needed to be delivered. His howls follow him to wakefulness and only inspire the matron to tighten her embrace, breaking more bones. The seer visits him periodically and mocks him about his former traveling companions, saying that the clan en masse only remains for fear of loneliness, and that Baeljag and Gareth have fled. The Malazans won't make it in time to help Kapustin, and the seer promises to bring Tok the body of the Malazan commander to eat. One day the seer appears angry and confused, saying that Baeljag and Gareth aren't mortal dogs. He tells Tok that his friends might have broken into the fort, but they won't find Tok, as they're moving to a new location. Tok is suddenly struck with a vision of the 2 dogs breaking into the fortress of Outlook, killing Kell hunters. A cloud of dust appears around the eye, and Tool materializes riding upon his back. Tool, Gareth, and Baeljag kill several Kell hunters before Tok is pulled back to his own vision. They have entered Amtos Felak, the matron carrying Tak and the seer leading the way through a scene of ice. Sorcery is heard clashing within the warren, and the seer recognizes Lady Envy. Tak is given a moment of clarity, and laughs at the seer's discomfiture. In her sudden panic, the matron crushes Tak to her chest, breaking his bones and causing him to pass out. Kapustin. Janot's Piran stands on a hillside at night and watches Kapustin burn. He's frustrated at the slow pace the white-faced Barghast are taking and tells Trots as much. Trots, who has been meeting with Humbral Tor and the other war chiefs, tells Piran that Tor is separating the clans for various tasks, and has given leave for the bridge burners to enter the city ahead of them. Piran's sickness and pain have persisted, partly, he thinks, because he has a need to attack and partly because he's been resisting Silverfox's attempts at contacting him from afar. The bridge burners used Morinth munitions against both Panyan medium infantry and the Teniscauri, and clear the gates with no losses, though the destruction shocks Piran. Trots orders the bridge burners to the thrall. Piran sees bodies everywhere, but notices a spot where bodies have been piled up into a slope. The Malazans are forced to climb the mound of bodies, and Piran realizes that it's essentially a siege ramp leading to the roof of a tenement building. Upon reaching the top, they're greeted by Gruntle and his militia, who are all now bearing stripes on their skin. Gruntle invites them onto the rooftop, dropping ladders. Piran notices that Picker is gripping her arm in pain, but she says that Mallet can help her. After they reach the rooftop, Gruntle goes to Picker and, upon touching her arm, the torques she took from Munich come loose. Picker prattles on about how relieved she is to be free of Trake's gift, and Gruntle tells her that Trake died and is now ascended. He takes the torques and fixes them to his arm. Picker gloats to blend. Piran speaks with Gruntle, and Mallet, with the help of the Barghast spirits, heals Stani Menakes of her battle injuries and the trauma of her rape. As dawn arrives, Picker watches the Barghasts slowly force the Panyans out of the city, but not without cost. Humbral Tor drives the Panyans westward across the plain, and a seething mob of Teniscauri filled the streets below the rooftop, some coming uncomfortably close. Despite the advantage that the Morinth munitions provided, Picker is glad that swords aren't needed, as the bridge burners are still brittle from what happened to them at Pale. She doesn't know if Onurm's host is even still intact, or if Dujek and Whiskey Jack are dead. Stani Menakes approaches, and they talk about Gruntle, the armed torques, and how the gods might have conspired to get Gruntle to fight by causing Stani's misfortune. Picker contends that it doesn't change what Gruntle did for Stani. Stani isn't sure. Thinking about how the gods tend to keep their followers in the dark, Picker decides to air some of her suspicions to Piran. She asks him, loudly, if he's heard anything from Silverfox. This causes him to double over in pain, but he manages to say she's still alive, and that Onurm's host is only 3 leagues away, slaughtering the Panyans that Tor is driving west. Ansi becomes suddenly angry, saying that he should have spoken up sooner, lest something happened to him during the battle, leaving the bridge burners completely cut off. Piran dismisses his concerns, which causes Ansi to reach for his sword. Tired of living with the pain, Piran offers Ansi his back, telling him to get it over with. This causes Mallet to speak up, saying that Piran only feels Silverfox's touch on his mind, and nothing else. He shames the bridge burners into silence, leaving Picker to think that the scars of betrayal from Pale still aren't fully healed. Piran isn't listening to Mallet castigating the bridge burners, but contemplating suicide. He feels pressure on his mind from Silverfox, but doesn't think it's Tattersail, rather Nightchill or Balerdan or both. Plucked away, he finds himself inside the card obelisk, and sees Finner pulled into the mortal realm. Vulnerable and terrified, Piran knows he's as good as dead. Piran begins to feel that the Elder Gods want him to choose a successor to replace Finner in the deck of dragons. This angers Piran, and he uses his connection with the Hounds of Shadow to intimidate Nightchill into talking with him. They talk about the cruel measures the gods employ when they need the services of mortals. Nightchill says that she and the surviving Elder Gods, including Krull and Draconis, are fighting a war for all existence. She tells Piran that Draconis needs to be freed from Dragnipur, and to do so requires the shattering of the sword. Piran is suspicious of this, and asks about Tattersail. Nightchill tells him her thoughts are elsewhere, which somewhat embarrasses Paran. Before she can speak further, Mallet touches Paran on the shoulder, bringing him back to the tenement rooftop. He tells Mallet that they need to get to the thrall, and that Gruntle is coming with them. Itkovian stands on top of Prince Jalarkin's castle, watching the Barghasts break up the remaining Panyan forces. Holding the palace had been rough work, the halls and doorways piled high with bodies. The young captain recruit, whom Itkovian now knows as Velbera, stands with him. He tells her that they're leaving the palace to go to the thrall. When Itkovian reaches the plaza in front of the thrall, he notices that every approach is surrounded by Barghast. Paran and the Brid burners approach accompanied by Gruntle and his militia. Seeing Gruntle, Itkovian realizes that Finner has fallen, and has been replaced with Trake as the new god of war. The masked council appear dragging Rathfinner into the plaza with Carolee walking behind them. Gruntle and Paran approach Itkovian, and tell of Finner's entry into the mortal world. Humbral Tor arrives and wishes to watch the events in the plaza before meeting his gods, to Paran's annoyance. Before Paran can continue, Itkovian approaches Rathfinner and declares he will be Finner's justice for the betrayal of Bricalion. The remaining Grey Sword captain, a woman named Norrell, throws Rathfinner on the ground and stretches his arms out in front of him. Itkovian cuts off Rathfinner's hands despite Rathdrake's warnings of what awaits the priest in Finner's absence. Paran tells Itkovian that he doesn't need to continue serving a fallen god, but can begin serving as Trake's shield anvil. Itkovian refuses. Just then, Rathfinner spasms in pain, his skin is covered in alien script, and he appears to be boiled alive, yet not dying, some unknown entity having claimed his hands and his mortal soul. Itkovian decides to take on Rathfinner's suffering, though Paran warns him that Finner isn't there to guard his soul against such pain. Itkovian proceeds to pick Rathfinner up and embrace him both physically and spiritually. As he allows Rathfinner's pain to wash over him, he notices the presence of the alien god that claimed Rathfinner's hands and embraces its pain as well. The grief that enters Itkovian then is too much for him to bear, and his soul begins to fragment. Realizing he can't depend on Finner, Itkovian asks the gods for help, but no help comes. Meanwhile, Paran watches Itkovian sink to the ground and stop breathing. Paran grabs him by the shoulders and yells at him to come back, which seems to bring Itkovian back to life. Itkovian feels a colossal weight settle on his shoulders, and Paran notices the air in Kapustan has been cleansed. Mallet comes forward to heal Itkovian. Upon Itkovian's return, Gruntle feels an awareness return to him. He finally notices how his body has changed, both in his enhanced senses and the cat-like control over his muscles. He understands that he has become Trake's mortal sword, though the revelation both terrifies and angers him. Stani approaches and he's able to joke with her for the first time, though the banter is somewhat brittle. When Stani mentions Buick, Gruntle points skyward, saying that he's flying around in the form of a sparrow hawk. Stani, annoyed that everyone seems to be getting blessed but her, asks what their next step is, as returning to Daruhustan doesn't seem likely. Rathdrake appears, wanting to discuss matters with Gruntle, but Gruntle tells him he won't bow to any god. Paran laughs at that, approving of Gruntle not complying fully with Trake's plans. Itkovian stands with some help from Mallet. Picker and Blend watch from an entrance to the plaza, and discuss what's been happening. Blend explains what she's seen, figuring that Paran was probably responsible for bringing Itkovian back, confirming her suspicions that he was more than just a noble-born officer, and would never stab the bridge burners in the back. The Barghast, following Humbral Tor, walk into the thrall, with Trotz following close behind. Picker and Blend both agree that Trotz doesn't know how to command, but Paran does. They plan on cornering Ansi and the other bridge burners who have been talking against Paran. Picker thinks it's the least she can do. Buick flies overhead. He watches the distant Barghast harrying the fleeing Panyans while the remaining Barghast mill about the city, carrying the dead to massive pits. The sight of burned buildings and dead children bring back painful memories for Buick, and he decides to fly away. He soars upward, towards the stars and thinks, there was pain in the gifts of the elder gods. But sometimes there was mercy. Chapter 18. Kapustan. Quick Ben wakes up in his tent, where Talamandas greets him with news of the retaking of Capustan. Quick Ben has been sleeping for several days, talking in his fevered sleep all the while. Talamandas knows that Quick Ben plans on fighting the crippled god, and applauds his boldness. The gods of the Barghast have been awakened and know the threat the crippled god poses. They wish to help Quick Ben in his fight, and Talamandas says he will be Quick Ben's shield, allowing him access to his warrens without being hurt by the crippled god's poison. Talamandas reveals that the white-faced nation will accompany the Malazans and help put an end to the Panyan Seer. Quick Ben, not revealing his plans to Talamandas, moves to a private place to try his warren, west of Capustan. Whiskey Jack and Dudjak One Arm are overseeing the battle between Onurm's host and the remaining Panyan Daman forces. Malazan discipline and tactics win the day, and Septar Kulpath is killed in the process. Corlett arrives and asks him to accompany her to Dudjak's command tent. As they travel the warren of Curald Galine, Corlett mentions that the crippled god's poison is beginning to assail even the elder warrens. When they arrive, Whiskey Jack finds a ghostly projection of Quick Ben, who gives him a report on Humbral Tor and how the white-faced Barghast intend on marching south to fight the Seer. Whiskey Jack and Quick Ben argue about what to do with the Teniscauri. Whiskey Jack doesn't wish to kill them all, and wants to give Anasta a trial under Malazan military law. Quick Ben thinks that the survivors of Capustan would want some say in the sentencing. Quick Ben departs. Corlett and Whiskey Jack argue further about the fate of the Teniscauri and the Panyan army. Whiskey Jack explains that the Malazans' goal is to neutralize the Panyan Seer, not to annihilate an entire people. Indeed, the very liberation of the various cities is incidental. When Corlett presses Whiskey Jack about the Malazan way of conquering and occupying a city, Whiskey Jack maintains that their army is outlawed. He realizes that Corlett already knew the outlawry is false, and his willingness to lie to her face has wounded her. She leaves the tent, and Whiskey Jack remains. He thinks, anguished, that Imperial agents are still present to make sure the charade is maintained. Dudjak arrives, and Whiskey Jack tells him that their allies know about the false outlawry. The two Malazans discuss the precarious situation they're in, when Artanthos announces a meeting with Kaladin Brood. The Maib lies in her wagon, thinking on how the wooden slats resemble the inside of a coffin. Every time she sleeps, she's terrorized by wolves chasing her. She's being attended by a woman who, upon being kicked in the head by a Bedouin, hasn't spoken to or looked at anyone. The Maib thinks on how they're both imprisoned in their bodies. As the woman combs her hair, the Maib's head is pulled back painfully. When the Maib glares at her, the woman is staring into her eyes. Krupp sits with Silverfox and they discuss how they feel a tremor in the alliance between the Malazans and Kaladin Brood's army. Silverfox asks after her mother, and muses that while the Maib still has a journey to make, her own journey is over. Krupp disagrees. They both plan on attending the meeting in Brood's tent, to see if they can heal the rift that's forming between the two armies. Anamanda Rake enters the tent where Corlett, Brood, and Collier are waiting. When Collier explains the treachery, Rake says he already knew, but doesn't care. He explains that the Panyan Daman rule their people with horror and bloodshed, and the Malazans are the only force willing to both destroy the Seer and remain in the area to ensure peace persists. The false outlawry probably only came about because Empress Lazine was confused as to why Brood and Rake were opposing her so fiercely. Whiskey Jack and Dudjak, Rake adds, probably had no choice in the matter. Collier and Brood reluctantly agree. When Whiskey Jack and Dudjak finally arrive, Brood wishes only to talk about how they'll divide their forces when they move south. Whiskey Jack will take the Malazans to Seta, and Brood will take his armies to Lest, and they'll meet up at Coral. When Whiskey Jack mentions the Tlan Amass, Collier reacts angrily and Brood decides to adjourn the meeting. Rake tells everyone that Moon's spawn will arrive at Coral, where they will most likely meet the Panyan Seer himself. The Seer's war to the south has driven him from Outlook, and Coral will most likely be where the war will end. Outside the tent, Krupp and Silverfox sense that the rift has healed between the armies. Silverfox intends on holding the gathering of the Tlan Amass soon, but without any witnesses. Krupp asks to accompany her, she agrees. Anamanda Rake asks Whiskey Jack to walk with him. Whiskey Jack complains about his badly healed leg, but stubbornly insists he doesn't have the time to have it properly healed. Rake mentions how Corlett seems to be newly enlivened after her contact with Whiskey Jack, and reassures the Malazan that her hurt is only temporary. Whiskey Jack asks about the Alliance, and Rake tells him he made sure the Alliance would stick, as they still need the Malazans. More specifically, they need Quick Ben and Janose Paran as the master of the deck. The crippled god has created a new house in the deck of dragons, and Paran has the ability to either sanction his joining or deny it. Rake hopes Paran will deny it. Whiskey Jack asks why the crippled god has the pantheon worried, as the elder gods and ascendants have taken care of him in the past. Rake says that Finner played a large part in the chaining, and now he's lost. A high priest to Finner invoked the Reve and cut off the hands of another priest. However, this was done unlawfully, most likely an attempt by the Claw to quash his discoveries of the ascension of Kelland and Dancer. The power of the Reve sent the priest's hands directly to Finner's realm, but because they were taken unlawfully, they were as poison to Finner. The priest survived, and was going to become Finner's instrument of revenge against the Malazan Empire for perverting his law. However, the priest came into contact with chaotic magic, and his hands pushed Finner into the mortal realm. Drake is now ascended into Finner's place, but Rake explains he is too young, his followers too few, to serve the same role. All is in flux now, and the crippled god is most likely smiling. Whiskey Jack promises to try and talk Paran into denying the crippled god's entry into the deck of dragons. Noticing Rake's unsettled mood, he offers to bring a cask of Gredfallen ale. Rake agrees. Capuston. Quick Ben is wandering around Capuston unseen. He tests the efficacy of Talamanda's shield by traveling exclusively through his warrens. Talamanda's reacts when they come close to the compound of Bauchelain and Corbel Broach. Quick Ben wants to talk with them, and easily slips past the undead soldiers and Sirenth demon guarding the entrance. He finds the two necromancers in a firelit chamber, Bauchelain reading a book, and Corbel Broach in his soul-taken form on the mantle. When Quick Ben reveals himself, Bauchelain invites him to sit. He orders Emancipa Reese to fetch a bottle of wine. Emancipa Reese mistakenly picks up a bottle of blood from Corbel Broach's collection, unfortunately learning this fact after taking a swig. Paran sits alone in the thrall's main chamber. The pains he's been feeling are slowly dissipating, and he thinks it's mostly to do with his aversion to power, and the vast power he has just come into. The masked council have all gone, and the bridge burners are staying in the Gidrith barracks. He's looking at the canoes that were recently unearthed when Kafal enters. Kafal tells Paran to come down, and shows him that each canoe is secretly holding a set of swords. Each sword is nearly weightless, yet none show signs of damage despite many years of use in battle. Kafal says that children will need to learn to use these weapons, as adult fighters will be used to heavier weapons, and implies they'll probably be used against the Malazans in the future. Paran changes the subject, and Kafal asks Paran to bless the newly awakened Barghast gods. Paran isn't sure how it's done, but doesn't promise either way. He leaves before the Barghast elders come into the chamber. Quick Ben and Bauchelain talk over wine while Corbel Broach continues to pace on the mantle. Quick Ben offers to tell Bauchelain who is poisoning the Warrens, but before he can, Corbel Broach attacks. Quick Ben easily dispatches him with a blast of 6 Warrens. Bauchelain is impressed by this, and tells Quick Ben that he plans on torturing him until he tells him everything he knows. Quick Ben tells Bauchelain about the crippled god moments before blasting Bauchelain with his 6 remaining Warrens. He passes Emancipa Reese, who is angry and confused as to why no one is willing to kill his masters. Quick Ben and Talamandas leave. Bauchelain wakes up in his garden. Emancipa Reese had just finished dragging him and Corbel Broach out of the house before they would suffocate from the smoke now filling the compound. Bauchelain thanks him, and wonders if he has any clothing left. Quick Ben tells Talamandas that he's all used up, and needs to draw on Talamandas' own power if they're to travel any further. Talamandas balks, saying that using his power will weaken his shield against the crippled god's poison. Quick Ben persists, saying they need to know the limits in case of an emergency. As Talamandas allows him to draw on his power, Quick Ben recognizes Hood's path. It confirms what he had already suspected: the Barghast gods have lent Talamandas to Hood, who has probably claimed the snare as the Magi of High House Death. Quick Ben uses his grip on Hood's warrant to summon Hood himself. When Hood appears, angry at his treatment, Quick Ben threatens to pull him into the mortal realm, just like Finner. Hood says that the House of Chains must be denied, and that some members of the Pantheon are already seeking to join it. Quick Ben argues with Hood about the importance of taking down the Pantheon Seer, and Quick Ben warns him not to treat Trake and the Barghast gods so cavalierly. Hood agrees to hold up his side of the bargain with the Barghast gods, and allow Talamandas the freedom to move. Quick Ben says he'll try to persuade Paran towards denying the House of Chains, and that he'll call upon Hood in the future. Hood angrily promises that Quick Ben will be his one day. Hood departs, and Talamandas reappears. The two head towards the thrall. Paran sits on the steps leading up to the thrall. He thinks about his family, with his parents dead, Felisin imprisoned, and Tavor consorting with the Empress' inner circle. He's joined by Gruntle, who has just come from a tryst with Hetan. The two talk about how either one of them fit the role they were given. Gruntle isn't a worshipper of Trake, and Paran knows nothing of the deck of dragons. Paran tells Gruntle his dilemma. Everyone says to deny the House of Chains legitimacy, but Paran still isn't sure. Gruntle says that legitimacy would mean the crippled god would have to play by the same rules as everyone else, instead of kicking the board now and again. Paran can see the logic and is thrilled at the thought, calling it good advice. The two aren't sure they'll be treated well in the afterlife for deciding this, however. Quick Ben and Talamandas see Paran and Gruntle on the steps. Quick Ben makes himself visible to the pair, and tells them that a parley is planned between the joint army, the Barghast, the Grey Swords, and Gruntle's legion. Before Quick Ben can protest, Paran tells him that he hasn't decided for or against denying the House of Chains into the deck of dragons. Quick Ben holds back his message from Hood, and tells Paran to trust his instincts. He leaves, and thinks to himself that the gods should prepare themselves. There will be a House of Chains one way or the other. Itkovian is overseeing the extrication of refugees from the tunnels beneath Kapustin. There are 319 Grey Swords remaining, and Itkovian thinks their presence is important to reassure the citizens of Kapustin that order still remains. Itkovian isn't sure what to do with the Grey Swords. Their losses will be hard to recover unless they can attract religious fanatics, and with Finner's fall, they risk becoming nothing more than a mercenary army only as loyal as the coin they receive. Itkovian decides that in order to give the Grey Swords a new religious backbone, they should center around the northern war aspect wolf gods, Tog and Fandere. He takes Velbara and Noril to a group of Barghast wise women, whom he asks to sanctify their new affiliation. Itkovian presents Velbara as a mortal sword, but the witches say that one is already found, and Velbara will be the destriant. Noril they named the shield anvil. Noril is anguished, saying that Itkovian is the shield anvil. Itkovian maintains he is Finner's shield anvil, but the Grey Swords are now remade with Velbara and Noril at their head. He tells Noril that the Grey Swords must see the end of the Pantheon Seer, and afterwards will find recruits among the Teniskauri. Itkovian watches as Noril is overcome with bleakness at this revelation, and curses himself for giving her no choice in the matter. Chapter 19. North of Kapustin. Krupp and Silverfox are riding away from the camp towards the area where the second gathering of the Tlan Mass will take place and are being followed by the two nameless Marines and the Tlan I. They stop on a low hill and the Tlan Mass rise from the dust in their tens of thousands. Krupp feels something in the air he can only guess is despair. Frozen between life and death for so long, he thinks, the Tlan Mass retain nothing of their past lives but memories of ice. Pranchol comes forward, telling Silverfox he stood with Krull during her birth. She asks if that makes him her father, and angrily accuses him of abandoning her. As Pranchol lowers himself in guilt and despair, another bonecaster of the Crone Tlan Amass comes forward, Okro Lam, who tells her that her rage is misplaced. If anyone could be considered her father, it would be Onos Tulin, whose isolation caused changes to his Telan Warren, which influenced her birth. Tul is slowly making his way to the gathering with a secret desire, but Okro Lam will not tell her what it is. 2 more bonecasters come forward, Iestos and Ola Ethel, who tell her that the bulk of the Logros Clan Amass forces are hunting renegade Clan Amass who have committed crimes. Logros himself commanded Ola Ethel to search for the 4 remaining nations of Clan Amass, the Bentract, who are trapped on the continent of Jakuruku, the Afail, Orshane, and Kurlam, all of whom seem to be missing and likely no longer exist. Kellant, upon claiming the first throne, commanded Logros to find them. When Kellant descended, he didn't yield the first throne, leaving the Clan Amass directionless, distracted by the presence of Jag Hut and the Jag Odin. Silver Fox asks Pranchol if any Jag Hut are left. Pranchol says there is one at the center of the deeds of the Panyan Seer. Krupp interrupts, telling Silver Fox that what the Clan Amass want is not an enemy to fight, but an end to their eternal limbo. In essence, they want to die. Silver Fox is shocked by this, and tells the Clan Amass that she belongs with them as their first mortal child. She doesn't want to be abandoned again. Pranchol and the rest of the Clan Amass all drop to their knees, pleading for release. Krupp assures her that the Jag Hut pose no threat, even if a tyrant were to rise, and begs her to redeem them and give them peace. Silver Fox says no, and the Clan I all join in a sorrowful howl. West of Kapustin, Corlett and Whiskey Jack have made up after their earlier misunderstanding and stand before the crowd of Tenascauri with Annister and the women of the Dead Seed at their head. The women open up warrens that cause the Malazans to feel an irrational fear, but none of the soldiers break. The Tenascauri prepare to charge, but Anamander Rake appears in his dragon form. He snatches Annister out of his saddle, but flings him away, staggering as if poisoned. Rake recovers, and blasts the Tenascauri and the women with Kueld Galine, which is enough to cause the Tenascauri to surrender. Rake stumbles back into his Teast Andii form, and draws Dragnapur in order to kill the women of the Dead Seed. Whiskey Jack intercepts, saying that Dragnapur is too harsh a sentence for these women so afflicted by madness. Rake says that Whiskey Jack must either kill them himself or allow Rake to do so, as the women are recovering. Whiskey Jack turns and executes the women as they stumble incoherently from Rake's assault. Whiskey Jack is stricken to see that the Malazan army watched him do this. Rake and Whiskey Jack talk about the weight of taking lives, and Whiskey Jack thinks to himself how no one could possibly bear the burden that Rake chose when he took on Dragnapur. The two go to meet Annister. Corlett and the Teast Andii have surrounded Annister, who has lost an eye in the conflict. Rake asks what should be done with him, and Annister, suddenly afraid, asks to be killed. Annister says that Ikovian wants his soul, and begs Rake to kill him. When Rake suggests they meet at Ikovian, Annister tries to kill himself, but fails. He crumples to the ground, weeping. Whiskey Jack and Dudjik discuss military procedures when it comes to executions, and Corlett approaches them. She tells them that Annister figured this final attack would see him and the Tenascauri killed, an act of mercy to his mind. Corlett tries to comfort Whiskey Jack, saying that the women of the Dead Seed were powerful mages, and would have unleashed destruction had he not killed them. Whiskey Jack is still afraid to face his army, but Corlett tells him he has never commanded more respect. His army would follow him to the abyss if he asked, she says, which scares Whiskey Jack most of all. They talk about how Lazine probably felt she could handle Dudjik as a high fist, but could not handle Whiskey Jack, and so had Whiskey Jack demoted. Whiskey Jack comes to the horrifying conclusion that the destruction of the bridge burners at Pale was just a botched attempt to have him assassinated. Corlett warns him to be careful who he trusts. Kaal and Murillo talk about the day's events. They realize that the Maid has been all but forgotten, her usefulness at an end. Sore at the injustice of this, they make a plan to take her away from the army once they reach Kapustin, perhaps finding a priest who might allow her some final dignity before she dies. The Maid is dreaming once again that she is being chased by wolves. This time, however, she loses them in a dense forest, where she cuts her cheek on an antler. She finds a cavern, and crawls inside of it, hoping she is moving closer to her death. A man calls to her from within the cave, and when she identifies herself as a mother, he laughs. He seems to think she's someone else, calling her seer, accusing her of trying to trick him. The Maib doesn't fully understand his words, as he talks about Amtos Felak and seeing a god of winter, a wolf, in his reflection. The Maib tries to convince him she is not who he thinks, but he continues, calling her tactics tricks to overthrow his mind. He says that a wolf resides in this dream world, and the seer's mother won't go near. He talks about the mother, how she has memories of children who loved her and children who betrayed her, nearly a lifetime imprisoned and in pain, and an unexpected release when the seer arrived. Finding all her children dead, and her city destroyed, she turned to the seer. She used his power to reanimate her children, but the undead revenants drove her insane, allowing the seer to usurp her. They speak on how love between mother and child is like a curse, when a distant howl is heard. The man says it is his mate, and he gives an answering howl which caused the Maib to scream. In the Maib's wagon, Kaal and Murillo hear her blood-curdling scream, and notice that a cut has appeared on her face. They agree to move the wagon to the front of the line. Chapter 20. Coral. Tok the Younger, deformed and broken inside from his weeks of torture, stands on a balcony overlooking the harbor of Coral. He's being held up by an unnamed Seerdaman, who surprises Tok with kind gestures and a regretful tale of his family coming to embrace the Panyan Daman. The Panyan seer wanted Tok to see Coral, planning on giving up Lest, Seta, and Maurik, and allowing the coming army to exhaust itself on the march. The Seerdaman leads Tok back to the matron, remembering how Coral's summer winds were once warm. Kapustin. Itkovian, Norrell and Hedge observe the demolition of unsound buildings while the business of fixing Kapustin takes place. Itkovian and Norrell begin making their way to a parley with Kaladin Brood and Dujek One Arm. Itkovian doesn't look forward to it, thinking he has nothing to contribute as he no longer commands the grey swords. Velbara is busy buying supplies from the white-face Barghast, making plans to recruit from the Tenniscauri who survive. They meet Gruntel and Stani Manakis, who is angry that the members of the Masked Council have gone ahead. Humbral Tor, Hetan, and Kafal join them on the road. Picker and Blend discuss the goings-on of the various factions when Paran and Quick Ben arrive. Paran asks where Spindle is, and Picker tells him that Spindle, Ansi, and Deteran found a man claiming to be Prince Erod who sought an audience with a representative of Onurm's host. The bridge burners intended to serve as such. Paran gives her a message for the prince and asks why she's alone. Picker turns to see that Blend has disappeared. Paran leaves, and the two women argue for a bit. Blend vanishes once more when Bauchelaine and Corbelbroch appear, asking somewhat rudely where they can find a clothier and supplies for their journey. Picker answers Bauchelaine's rudeness with a punch to the face, knocking him out cold. Blend knocks out Corbelbroch. Amansa Paris arrives, and the two women leave. West of Kapustin. Quick Ben and Paran ride towards the parley, discussing the state of the grey swords, when they spot Silverfox and Krupp in the distance. Paran knows the second gathering has occurred. Paran sees anger and pain in Silverfox's face, and has his intuition confirmed when she snaps at Quick Ben. She says she has no report to give nor will answer any questions. The four resume their ride to the parley. A makeshift tent has been constructed atop a hill for the parley. Itkovian talks with Hetan, but rebuffs her advances with unshakable solemnity. The Masked Council arrives, Carolee in the lead, followed by Gruntel, Stani, Humbral Tor, and Norrell, whom Itkovian sends in alone. Itkovian approaches a Malazan guard, and asks to trade his ornamental officer's helm for a common soldier's. The soldier, who calls himself Uzra Jael, willingly exchanges his helm, and assures him that the members present in the tent would be honored by Itkovian's presence. Itkovian elects to enter through the back unnoticed. Despite his best efforts, all motion ceases when someone notices Itkovian, and everyone turns to look at him. Kaladin Brood tries to make him feel welcome, calling him Defender of Kapustin, but Itkovian insists that he failed and has nothing to contribute to the meeting. The meeting proceeds, with some members of the Masked Council squabbling over trifles, and it comes to light that Carolee is not merely a priest of Krull, but a physical manifestation of the Elder God himself. Krull insists that he be of service given the threat the crippled god poses to the world. The meeting moves on to matters of tactics, the white-faced Barghast intend on marching with Onurm's host to Seta, and the grey swords will march with Kaladin Brood's army. Rathburn interjects, saying that she has business with Brood's hammer. Byrne gave him her hammer to wake her up in time of her greatest need, but Brood, according to the High Priestess, has betrayed her trust by not waking her up now when she's so assailed by the crippled god. Brood offers to let her have the hammer, but the preternatural weight snaps Rathburn's wrists when it drops to the ground. Brood explains that Byrne had faith in him to find another solution, which he intends. Brood, using unaffected hide de null, heals her wrists. Piran, Quick Ben, Silverfox, and Quick Ben arrive, and Silverfox informs the parley that the clan Amass will accompany them to Coral and deal with the Kell hunters in the Seer's service. When Silverfox says that the clan Amass only exists to kill Jag Hut, Whiskey Jack points out Tool's adventure with Adjunct Lorne to awaken Reyes. Silverfox dismisses this, calling Tool clanless, and declaring Reyes dead. Piran mentions seeing him in the Finnis house in Daruhastan alive, and Krupp and Crow confirm this. Silverfox interrupts them, saying the Logros clan Amass are under her authority, and challenges anyone to question it, which causes an awkward silence in the tent. The meeting winds down, and Itkovian decides to leave, and running into Whiskey Jack, Quick Ben, Piran, and Corlett. Whiskey Jack invites Itkovian to share in a cask of Gredfallen ale, and Itkovian accepts. They discuss Silverfox's state of mind, and Itkovian says that while Silverfox has perpetrated a great wrong, he senses no guilt in her mind. Krupp appears, seeking to join them, and tells them that certain truths have been revealed to him. In his loquacious manner, Krupp talks of the separation of Tog and Fandere on the day the crippled god crashed to the earth, and how they are now, after thousands of years, within sight of one another, and their reunion is inevitable. He also claims that there are not only 3 souls, but 4 souls inside Silverfox, Tattersail, Nightchill, Belurden, and the child of Pranchol, who is Silverfox in truth. He concludes by telling all present to have faith and patience. Itkovian moves away, mumbling about needing the Gredfallen ale more than ever. Piran joins him, and Quick Ben tells Krupp to drink somewhere else. The 2 Marines who have been guarding Silverfox are chatting when Silverfox joins them. They are met by Norrell and Heradas from the Trigull Trade Guild. Heradas asks Silverfox if the Trigull Trade Guild can use the Tellan warrant to travel by, given its resistance to the crippled god's corruption. Silverfox gives her permission, but warns her of the renegade clan Amass who contest the beast's throne. Heradas introduces Norrell, who asks Silverfox to release the Tlani from the ritual of Tellan on behalf of Tog and Fandere. When Silverfox says she needs them for a gift that she swore to herself, Norrell reminds her that the Eye were caught up in the ritual in ignorance, and against their will. She warns Silverfox that her gift might get her killed. Hetton arrives and breaks the tension by making bawdy jokes about Itkovian and Krupp. She offers food and wine to the gathered women, and all sit, including Norrell. Kahl and Murillo have been surreptitiously buying supplies for their planned escape for the Maib, including a pair of ill-tempered horses from the Mod Irregulars. The march to Kapustan begins, and the 2 scramble to find their place in line. Kahl narrowly avoids a kick from one of the horses, who runs away. Kahl calls for a lasso. Murillo suggests a mallet with which to put the horse out of everyone's misery. Coral Bay. Lady Indy and the Segula find themselves stopped at a shoreline, watching icebergs float by. Envy is annoyed that she cannot follow Tool across these waters, as he can float as dust to dry land. Mock tells Envy that Gareth is ill with a plague, the same plague Envy unleashed on her enemies. At first she denies it, but eventually admits it was only fitting to illicitly make use of Poliel's warren, since the goddess of disease has allied herself with the crippled god. She heals Gareth, who predictably snaps at her, but then turns to the water. Mock points out an iceberg with a piece of torn-off harbor with wicker structures and intact houses, and suggests making their way to it. Before Envy can protest, Baeljagd runs to the water, scampering from berg to berg until she reaches the wicker structure, Gareth not far behind. Envy and the Segula make their way to the structure with more difficulty, which Mock identifies as part of a Mekro's floating city. He suggests they inspect the buildings. Envy finds Gareth and Baeljagd, who have found a Tlan Amass. Mistaking her for Tool, she learns that the Tlan Amass is called Lannis Tog. She is answering the summons, calling herself the last of the Kurlam Tlan Amass. She brings word of the Afail, who have been devastated in 8 months of battle. Envy asks if there is a new Jaghut tyrant about, but Lannis Tog tells her they have been fighting humans. Chapter 21. Kapustin. Paran is watching the bridge burners file out of Kapustin when Silverfox approaches him. She tells him that Kal and Murillo have kidnapped the Maib. Paran accuses her of abandoning her mother, and that Kal and Murillo are probably just looking to grant her some dignity in her last days. In the ensuing argument, the two discuss their past relationship. Paran says that once she died, he over-romanticized their short time together. Silverfox tells him she no longer recognizes him. The two part ways, Paran telling Silverfox to let her mother go, and Silverfox refusing to listen. As she goes, Paran thinks how the Tlan Amass have indeed found a leader as cold and emotionless as they. Itkovian watches the Barghast salvage Panyan Daman barges in order to cross Catlin River towards Lest and Seta. He spots a painter conversing with a talking frog. The painter introduces himself as Ormulogan, imperial artist, and the frog as Gumbel, his art critic. Ormulogan tells Gumbel that when he looks at Itkovian, he sees the weight of all the grief he carries, but knows that he is not yet done. This dismays Itkovian. Itkovian wanders off, musing on the command structure of the armies now joined together: Onurm's host, Kaladin Brood's mercenary host, the white-faced Barghast, plus the grey swords and Trake's legion. He meets Whiskey Jack, who asks him about Silverfox. Itkovian admits he saw her and the 2 Marines guarding her, but does not know where they are now. Just then, the 2 Marines arrive, saying that Silverfox disappeared into the side of a hill where they couldn't follow. Whiskey Jack tells them to cross the river as soon as they can, and offers Itkovian his armored hand as a sign of respect between warriors. Quick Ben and Krupp are standing on the shoreline of Catlin River while Quick Ben uses his many warrants to aid in the barge's crossing. Talamandas complains that he is showing off too much, and the Panyans and the crippled god will know Quick Ben is immune to the poison afflicting the warrants. Pretending to talk to Krupp, Quick Ben explains he is purposefully doing this to throw the Panyans off guard, who are most likely straining to sense a small, subtle use of sorcery. The 2 Marines arrive, with Whiskey Jack not far behind. Quick Ben moves to join him. Kal and Murillo are navigating through the darkened alleys of Kapustin when they are attacked by Korbel Broach. Kal is saved at the last second by a man holding 2 swords, whom Korbel Broach calls Knight of Death. The unnamed warrior tells Korbel Broach that he and Bochelane must leave Kapustin tonight, warning of the nightmares awaiting them in the afterlife. Korbel Broach pleads to take the Maib, given how many souls Hood has claimed recently, but flies away when the warrior advances. The warrior turns to Kal, telling him the Maib must enter Hood's temple. Kal agrees and asks him his name, but the warrior doesn't remember it. He only remembers that he once tried to protect a child, and that he died surrounded by flame. Kal thinks that Hood must possess some mercy to take away such horrible memories. Itkovian crosses the river with Stani Menakes and Gruntle, along with Trake's legion. They find mostly barren fields and burned-out huts where there might have been people. Itkovian thinks that the Panyans will have burned almost everything leading up to Korel. He and Gruntle discuss how the Panyan Empire was never meant to sustain itself, except on the outer edges of its conquest. He predicts that Seta, Lest, and Maurik will be empty, and that the Teniskauri are probably nothing more than a source for food for the main fighting forces. Gruntle is confused as to why the armies are still separating if this is true. Itkovian thinks it has something to do with the powerful personalities present in each army. Stani Menakes arrives and tells the two to hurry up. South of Kapustin, Picker and Blend are in front of a campfire watching the rest of the bridge burners turn in for the night. They talk about how most of the bridge burners, starting with Whiskey Jack himself, are all less than they once were, having been demoted or shuffled about since Lazine took power. Paran arrives and tells Picker that she is now his lieutenant, second in command of the bridge burners. Picker balks, but accepts. She and Blend go to their tent, and Picker thinks her peaceful nights are over. Whiskey Jack and Dijik meet in Dijik's tent and discuss their plans, which apparently involve Quick Ben and Paran leaving the army for a time. Dijik muses on the unlikeliness of the bridge burners running into Munich as he went to visit the crippled god, and Paran's elevation to the master of the deck. They discuss how, now that they know Brood's hammer is capable of ending all civilization, they're basically obligated to step into the crippled god's path in order to keep Brood from feeling he needs to use it. Dijik then lectures Whiskey Jack on how the events at Pale were a huge mistake, and that Tashran sent the bridge burners underground because he thought it was the safest place. Whiskey Jack agrees, but inside, he is not convinced it was not part of a plot to have him assassinated. Dijik thinks the string of foul-ups, including Pale and Belerdin's killing of Tattersale, all started when the clan en masse slaughtered the citizens of Arran. He thinks this must have been Kellen's work, not having been assassinated after all. Whiskey Jack suddenly tells Dijik he wants to retire after the war with the Panyans. Dijik suggests he fake his death like Dasa Multer. As Whiskey Jack leaves, Dijik tells him Tashran wants to offer him an apology in person for what happened at Pale. Whiskey Jack finds Corlett waiting for him at his tent. Corlett was searching for Silverfox, but was led astray by the Tlan Eye. They discuss future plans, awkwardly avoiding the subject of the armies splitting despite the cities being empty. Whiskey Jack tells her that nothing in the world matters to him more than she does, and Corlett tells him he seems to be apologizing for something that has not happened yet. Whiskey Jack demurs, but tells himself she is right. He thinks back on the moment later, wishing he had been more honest with her. Paran and Quick Ben are haggling with the Trigall Trade Guild, sending more munitions to Fiddler and Sari. Krupp overhears their discussion and tells them that Beric of Daruhistan wants to help them. He breaks a glass orb which produces a misty Bokarala. The Bokarala tells them that Beric senses danger concerning the Azath house and Icarium, also expressing an admiration for Colton. Velbara approaches the group and asks to speak to Paran. The two move away, and Velbara asks Paran if the Grey Swords can have Anister transferred to their care. Paran asks if they mean to torture him, but Velbara insists they only wish to take away his grief and pain, something Anister might consider torture. Paran tells them they may have him. With my blessing. This causes Velbara to stagger, saying there was weight in his use of that word. Paran is frightened by this, thinking this a warning to be more careful with his words. Chapter 22. Coral. Tok the Younger is on the floor of a meeting room in Coral with the Panyan Seer and various Septarchs and Seerdamen. He is so deformed he can barely move on his own, his ribs so mangled he has trouble breathing. During much of the meeting, he doesn't know his own name, but remembers it when he hears the Seer mention the approaching Malazan army. Tok tells the Seer that Onurm's host is the deadliest force ever produced, and that even the matron has the sense to fear them. The Seer scoffs, saying that the matron only fears the sight of Moon's spawn, as it was the original creation of the Cain Narak, the short-tailed kin responsible for the extinction of the matron's people. Even if the Teast Andii could use it to its fullest potential, Moon's spawn has not been seen for hundreds of miles in any direction and has most likely succumbed to the damage it received over Pale. Tok quails at the Seer's power over him, and is taken back to the matron. On the way back, however, the Seerdaman he met earlier tells him he'll be placed just out of the matron's reach, and that food and water will be brought to him. Tok surprises the Seerdaman by telling him not to risk his own life for his comfort, but the Seerdaman insists. Coral Bay. Lady Envy and Lannis talk while riding the floating piece of a Mecrose city toward Coral. Envy tells her that Baeljag was once a mortal eye whose pack was destroyed. When the crippled god fell, Fandaray was mortally wounded. An elder god placed Fandaray in Baeljag's body to heal. Envy and Lannis both agree it was perhaps unmerciful to have Baeljag survive so isolated for so many years. Near Lest. Crone is talking to Kaladin Brood while Collier and Corlett listen. Crone is panicking because she cannot find Animander Rake or Moon's spawn, and no one seems to know whether or not the Teast Andii still live. She tells them that the Malazans are closing in on Seta, making a faster march of it than Brood's forces. Collier and Brood argue over whether this means deceit, and Corlett's thoughts drift towards Whiskey Jack. She finds it remarkable that he opened up to her, and that Rake befriended him. Throughout history, Rake has had only one friend, Kaladin Brood, and that friendship has only survived so long because they keep their distance from each other. Crone continues to moan as the city of Lust comes into view. Corlett tells Crone that the Teist Andi are still alive, but admits to herself that she isn't totally certain. Gruntle, Itkovian, and Stani Manakis are riding near the Grey Swords and Trake's Legion when they find out that Bochelane and Corbel Broach are following not far behind with no sign of Buke. Gruntle makes a mad dash towards their carriage, and Itkovian, at Stani's request, goes with him. As they ride, Itkovian tells Gruntle he met Buke once and offered to take away his pain, but Buke refused. Gruntle says he should have forced him, but Itkovian mentions Anister. After having his pain taken from him by the Grey Sword's new shield anvil, he seems to be an empty shell, incapable of speech. Buke's fate might have been the same, had Itkovian forced him. When they reach the carriage, Gruntle asks Emancipa Reese, who is suffering from a broken tooth, about Buke. Reese tells him that Buke flew away, and Bochelane appears. After a brief and awkward exchange, Itkovian tells Bochelane about Reese's tooth. Bochelane says that Corbel Broach will have to perform surgery, to Reese's horror. As they leave, Gruntle tells Itkovian that Corbel Broach's idea of healing might cause Reese to curse Itkovian's name. Capustan. Kal and Murillo are inside a temple of Hood in Capustan. The unnamed warrior that rescued them is preparing a bed for the Maib in another room. As he waits, Kal recalls his ex-wife, Lady Simtal, telling him she was pregnant. When he asks about it, Murillo demurs at first, but tells him that she probably was, but nobody told Kal because he was busy drinking himself to death. Murillo thinks Simtal hid the child so she could use it later as marriage bait. Kal initially wants to take the child back, but Murillo convinces him that despite his 3 months of sobriety, he is definitely not prepared to raise a child. Kal decides to be a hidden benefactor. The nameless warrior appears saying the preparations are complete. Kal and Murillo enter the room and find he's carved a sarcophagus into the stone of the temple's floor. The Maib dreams she is in a desolate, featureless wasteland. The wolves that once pursued her are gone, but the vast emptiness is far worse to her mind. She finds she's losing a sense of self, of substantiality in her dream world when something appears in the distance. It swiftly grows enormous, a cage of bloody, malformed ribs with skin stretched over it. Blood vessels pulse and the Maib senses that life is ebbing from both the cage and herself. Dust suddenly flies about, and the skin becomes a web and the ribs become legs, and she begins sliding towards it. Chapter 23. Seta. Picker waits with Jano's Paran outside of Seta. The bridge burners have been doing most of their traveling with the Black Morinth at night, watchful of the possessed condors working for the Panyan Seer. While they wait for a scouting expedition led by Ansi, Quick Ben arrives to tell Paran that Twist, the Black Morinth leader, is near death and infection from an old wound in his arm has spread. Ansi arrives and tells Paran that Seta is empty but for condors' nests and piles of eaten corpses. Ansi assumes Maurik will be the same once they arrive, but Paran reveals to the bridge burners that they're flying directly to Coral. He orders his troops to get ready and is met by Twist. Twist asks if Paran blessed the newly awakened Barghast gods. Paran says no, he was not asked to do so, although he does acknowledge their place amongst the pantheon. When Paran asks about the schism between the Barghast and the Morinth, Twist tells him of a meeting long ago between the Morinth and the Teist Eater, the longtime enemies of the Barghast. Finding out the Eater weren't the monsters they were purported to be, the Morinth refused to fight them. This was a crime in the eyes of the Barghast, and resulted in the schism. Twist wonders what awaits him in death now that the Barghast gods have returned. Paran tries to comfort him, saying the Barghast gods might have gained wisdom and tolerance in their long absence. Twist leaves, saying that the Malazan Empire is a wise empire. North of Maurik, Krupp is accosted by Hetan and Kafal, who ask about the Malazans' odd behavior. Hetan has seen one company strike the tents of 3 other companies, an act repeated throughout the camp, and dust seems to conceal the bulk of the Malazan forces. Krupp offers no answers, and his lengthy non-answers annoy Hetan. She grabs him by the collar and promises to shut him up for good once she beds him. This frightens Krupp into silence, which satisfies Hetton as she rides away. North of Seta, Whiskey Jack orders the two Marines who were guarding Silver Fox to accompany him until further ordered. He argues a bit with Artanthos on the merits of allowing the common soldier to think for themselves, and goes to meet Dujek. Dujek and he talk about splitting the army into two commands, with Dujek taking the riskier position. Whiskey Jack does not approve, but Dujek maintains that Whiskey Jack is the one that actually holds the loyalty of the soldiers. Plus, the Empress needs a seasoned commander who knows 7 cities to help put down the rebellion. Dujek intends on going to Karel if he survives the Panion War. Whiskey Jack maintains he is going to retire once the Panion War is done. Dujek makes a few friendly jabs at Whiskey Jack's projected marital bliss with Corlett, and invites Whiskey Jack to one last meal together. An awkward silence ensues until Dujek clarifies he meant one last meal before Coral. River Arun. The bridge burners arrive at the River Arun, which deepens into a massive trench called Ortnell's Cut before flowing into Coral Bay. The Black Morinth suddenly turn their quarrels toward the river, claiming something strange has appeared since the night before. Piran and Quick Ben find several Black Morinth around a dead human-shaped creature, bloated and disfigured with snapped bones jutting out. After a lengthy discussion, the assembled crew determine that it's a Teast Eater who was killed when he was thrown into a warren leading directly to the bottom of Ortnell's Cut, most likely by a practitioner of ruse, something unheard of in both the Malazan Empire and amongst the Morinth. The Teast Eater are on the move again, and are probably seeking the true Throne of Shadow. Miana's, the realm of Shadow Throne, is just a minor warren, splintered off Curel de Merlin, the Warren of Elder Shadow. Another war within the Pantheon will likely begin over the Throne of Shadow, much to the crippled god's delight. Drift of Alii. Piran excuses himself and travels to the Finnis house. He uses the holds to find the Throne of Shadow. He finds it, and learns that it's in the mortal realm on Drift of Alii, a floating island supposedly populated by Teast Andi. The throne, seemingly alive, tells Piran to warn Anomander Rake. The Teast Eaters seek to destroy Mother Dark, and are under the control of a mad emperor who has been slain 100 times. The throne describes the emperor of the Eater as a tyrant of pain, and a deliverer of midnight tides. Dragnipur. Piran reels back and appears within Dragnipur. He finds Draconus among the souls chained to the wagon. Draconus tells him that Anomander Rake is too merciful to wield Dragnipur. More souls are required to pull the wagon within which resides the gate to High House Dark. Piran sees that the wagon is being chased by a storm made of chaos. Draconus explains that darkness and chaos have been warring eternally, and darkness has been retreating. Chaos was almost at the gates of Cureld Galine when Draconus thought to create a defense, the sword Dragnipur. Chaos hungers for the souls within Dragnipur, and it pursues. Yet as the souls who pull the wagon fall, chaos grows closer. Rake must begin killing again to buy them time, and Dragnipur must be destroyed, lest chaos ultimately catch up. Draconus has learned that order has its own methods of defense. Souls are bound up in the deck of dragons, in the Azath houses, and in the holds, protecting them from chaos. Draconus promises Piran, however, that if chaos overtakes darkness, everyone will be caught up in the storm. Rake must be warned. Piran decides to find him even as another soul in the chain falls. Piran wills himself to find Anomander Rake, focusing on High House Dark. He feels a hammering force, a flash, then oblivion. River Arun. Piran wakes up with Mallet over him. It's noon the next day. Quick Ben arrives and tells him that the condors are sweeping the sky in an attempt to find them. Piran says they're probably looking for Moon's spawn, but they won't find it. He thinks it might be lost, and that Anomander Rake is gone. Seta. The main column having arrived at Seta, Whiskey Jack, Hedden, and Kafal listen to Krupp harping on about how awful the sight of the city is. Krupp wishes for darkness to come and hide the city from his sight. Hedden mutters that betting him only quieted Krupp for 2 days. Kafal asks her to try shutting him up until they reach Maurik. When Hedden promises just that, Krupp wishes for darkness to never arrive. River Arun. At night, A weary and freezing picker looks on a meeting between Piran, Quick Ben, Spindle, Shank, Toes, and Blue Pearl, all the mages present in the bridge burners. Mallet approaches and tells her he thinks Piran and Quick Ben are planning something that even Dijak might not know about. Hedge and Trot suspect something as well. Blend arrives, having been unable to spy on Piran, and says it's time to get ready. The three move to rouse the troops, airing their concerns about the condors and the imminent march to Coral. Near Maurik, the army led by Kaladin Brood, including the Grey Swords and Trake's Legion, are marching toward Maurik as fast as they can, resulting in a caravan spread nearly 3 miles long. Itkovian has opted to stay with Gruntle and his troop at the back of the line. When Gruntle remarks on Itkovian's introspective mien, it sparks an argument between him and Stani Manakis about Byuk and what kind of redemption he sought following the death of his family. When Gruntle claims he understands Byuk's feeling of loss, Stani scoffs. Stani is struck silent when Gruntle says he lost Harlow and nearly lost Stani herself. Itkovian reveals that he doesn't seek redemption for himself, but for the thousands of souls he took on at Kapustin, which he still carries. He hopes to find answers in Coral. Their conversation is interrupted by a man calling himself High Marshal Straw of the Mata Regulars. Straw asks why the army is moving so fast. When Itkovian says that Brood wants to reach Maurik before the Malazans, Straw reveals that the Mata Regulars have spies in the Malazan army. The Malazans have split in two and Whiskey Jack now leads an army of only 4,000. They've reached Maurik River and are going to use barges to float to Maurik and join with Brood in a matter of days. The Mata Regulars have tried to tell Kaladin Brood about this, but have been stopped by Collier. Thinking they've been forgotten by Brood, most want to return to Maltwood. Stani and Itkovian convince them to remain by telling them of a forest in Coral. This convinces Straw, who leaves. The three discuss Straw, the Mata Regulars, and the likelihood of Dujek having beaten them to Coral. Itkovian wonders what it would mean if he traveled all the way to Coral to find no war. River Maurik. A seasick Hetan is traveling by barge with Humbral Tor and Whiskey Jack. Apparently, her attempts to cow Krupp have backfired, and the Daru is now in love with her, much to her father's amusement. Whiskey Jack and Humbral Tor speak of the approach to Maurik, about a day's journey by barge. Whiskey Jack knows there are Mata Regular spies in his camp, and that Brood probably knows of their early arrival. He describes the origins of the Mata Regulars, an insurgent group that formed after the Malazans took Mott. A year and a half of fighting in Mottwood led nowhere. When Dijik pulled them out, Brood drew the Mata Regulars into his army. They further discussed the Malazans' intentions regarding the white-face Barghast. Whiskey Jack tells Tor that the Malazans will respect their previous treaties, and merely attempt to trade with the white-face. After a groan from Hetan, Tor remarks that she might be suffering from symptoms of early pregnancy. This revelation causes Hetan's nausea to get the better of her. Maurik. Corlett rides through Maurik, thinking about her Teist Endi kin and what it would mean if Animander Rake really were gone forever. Despite all they have witnessed, the despair affecting the Teist Endi is still their greatest threat, something Rake managed to curtail through strength of personality. She considers what it would mean for her and Whiskey Jack if she had to take up Rake's role as leader. She approaches the outskirts of the city near a river and finds Kaladin Brood, Collier, Outrider Hurlichel, and Orfantal, her brother and second in command. All have been standing in tense silence for over an hour. As Corlett and her brother talk, the first barge arrives with Whiskey Jack and Humbral Tor visible. When they land, Humbral Tor tells them that 3 clans of the White Face took the barges while the rest walked. Whiskey Jack tells them that Dijik split the army and took half of them directly to Coral. Whiskey Jack argues that the disappearance of Moon's spawn and Brood's own private plan led the Malazans to concoct their own. He also claims that the Great Ravens haven't successfully gotten close enough to Coral to get any reliable information. The preemptive arrival of Onurm's host might provide invaluable intelligence. Outnumbered as they are, however, it is now important that the rest of the army arrive at Coral quickly to relieve them. Brood allows the Malazans to cross the river first, and take a more exhausting pace, provided Corlett and Orfantal accompany them. The remaining forces should arrive in 8 days. As the parties separate, Orfantal threatens Collier for his insults to the T-Standii. Whiskey Jack and Corlett are reunited. Gruntle and Itkovian reach the barges several hours after Humbrol Tor and Whiskey Jack have crossed, to Itkovian's disappointment. Rivi herders are trying to get their veteran across the river, blocking access to the barges. They meet another mod irregular calling himself High Marshal Sty, who is attempting to steal dung from the herders. As Gruntle argues for passage with the leader of the herders, Sty knocks out the man guarding the dung and runs onto a barge. Gruntle remarks that the Rivi dropped like a sack of dung, which makes Itkovian smile. Near Coral. 2 days out from Coral, Whiskey Jack, rain-drenched and facing a march fraught with problems, thinks he's pushing his troops too hard. Corlett and Orfantal, meanwhile, are exhausting their own forces trying to purge Curald Galine of the crippled god's taint. Whiskey Jack thinks leaving behind the 50,000 Barghast might prove to be a fatal decision. Collier studies the prairie and notices a basin where the rainwater flows uphill. Collier thinks, from dust to mud. So you march with us after all. No, understand, I am pleased. He goes to Kaladin Brood, who sits slumped in a camp chair. Brood says he made a mistake and Collier agrees, surprising Brood by telling him abandoning Onurm's host to annihilation was a tactical mistake. Collier asks permission to ride to join Corlett and Whiskey Jack, citing his experience in tactics and his individual prowess in battle. Despite being momentarily surprised by Collier's zeal, Brood tells him to go. As Collier leaves his tent he smiles, though no one sees. Lady Envy, Lannis Tog, and the Segula accompanying them land near Coral. Envy and the Segula are eager to begin marching on the seer. Lannis Tog examines the ground and says a group of people, heavily laden, passed by their landing site, and were pursued by a predator of some kind, perhaps a large cat. Envy is excited by this news and tells Lannis Tog to follow their trail. Piran, Quick Ben, and the bridge-burner mages are discussing plans inside a series of tunnels once used by the Panyan Daman. However, a company is on its way up the mountainside including 400 Beklites and at least one Seerdaman, most likely a mage. They will be at their position in about an hour. Piran tells Spindle to gather the other sappers and figure out how to blow up the tunnels in such a way that the seer will think the entire Malazan army is on the hillside. Spindle goes to find Hedge. Piran asks Quick Ben about their plan to deal with the Seerdaman sorcerer in charge of the approaching company. Shank volunteers to take care of him but can't describe the spell he intends to use, lest the Seerdaman become aware of it through magical means. Piran tells Toes to find Picker and distribute a cache of bows and arrows found in the tunnels. As the Panyan army approaches, Shank and Quick Ben kill the Seerdaman leader by transporting the water from a canteen directly into his lungs, drowning him. Munitions are thrown in the woods, soaked in lantern oil, swiftly catch fire. All those who try to flee the conflagration are killed by Picker and the rest using the procured arrows. Looking at Quick Ben, Piran gets a fleeting glimpse of Talamandas, but thinks it's a trick of the light. As the flames die out, Piran thinks on how the munitions change things from war to simple slaughter. Mallet arrives to tell Piran that Dujek has arrived with the Morinth and reinforcements. Quick Ben and Piran are relieved and go to meet Dujek. Chapter 24. Kapustin. Kal is grooming his horses outside of the Temple of Hood when he is approached by Ras Shadowthrone, who has been spying on him and the temple for some time. After several pointed insults, the priest points out 2 more members of the masked council having approached the temple, Rathfandere and Rathtog. He tells Kal that the 2 have never spoken aloud in the council, and never touch, despite being lovers. The undead warrior emerges with Murillo and lets the 2 priests in. Kal moves to follow, punching Ras Shadowthrone in the face for spying, knocking him out cold. Inside the temple, Kal makes his way to the sepulchre. He and Murillo have laid a cot down beside the pit where the undead warrior wants them to place the Maib. The hooded priests of Tog and Fandere are at the edge of the pit, not saying a word. Murillo observes that everyone's waiting. Northwest of Coral. Picker, Ansi, and the rest of his squad are hiding near the walls of Coral, looking on numerous ranks of Beklites that have amassed against Dujek One Arm and the 6,000 troops now occupying the entrenchments on the mountainside. Ansi guesses there are about 30,000 Panion troops assembled, including a mage cadre. Picker and Ansi argue for a bit over whether the Panion seer intends on stomping the Malazans flat. When sorcery begins to play, Picker calls for Blend to report to Dujek. Quick Ben is trying to calm the rest of his impromptu cadre. He orders them back to their companies, saying he'll deal with the bulk of the attack. Dujek and Janot's Paran arrive, having just learned of the oncoming sorcery. Quick Ben admits that the situation isn't ideal, but he's their only available defense. Dujek asks Paran and Quick Ben whether it would be a fair, tactical exchange to fight the Panions here, at the possible cost of the 6,000 troops, or to simply blow up the tunnels and retreat for now. Quick Ben thinks about his promise to Burn and the plans he and Paran had, but he understands that destroying several companies, mages, and septarchs would save lives during the coming siege. He and Paran agree to fight. As Dujek and Paran leave, Quick Ben notices Blend hovering nearby. She offers him a necklace she bought in Panpotson that makes her hard to see. Quick Ben kindly refuses, thinking that she was swindled with a useless stone, and her ability to disappear is her own. Picker and Blend watch as the Panion forces make their way up the main ramp into the mountainside. The mage cadre unleashes their sorcery at Quick Ben, who has positioned himself in plain view. Picker thinks this is suicide as she's never seen Quick Ben fully unveil a warren, and doesn't consider him a combat mage like Tattersail or Hairlock. However, Quick Ben unleashes several devastating attacks using illusions in the form of demons, which throw the mages and the forward troops into disarray. After his position is struck with chaotic sorcery, Quick Ben appears as a Panion mage, and throws a wraith amongst the Seerdamen, which punctures the protective magic set up by the mages. He rides into a warren before he's struck with magic. Picker and Blend notice that the column is leaving the main path and heading into the woods towards Picker's position. Paran is overseeing his dug-in troops when Quick Ben arrives from a warren. He watches as the mage draws on several warrens, causing shadows to flow and boulders to come up from underground. Suddenly, 3 waves of chaotic magic fly up the mountainside. The waves get drawn in by the flowing shadows, and Paran hears a distant explosion coming from down the mountainside followed by screams. Quick Ben then unleashes the boulders he collected, causing a landslide, wiping out the Panion troops. Paran hears the sound of munitions, and turns to see that the Becklites stumbled onto the rigged tunnels. Marines with crossbows begin slaughtering the Panions only to be struck down by chaotic sorcery. Paran watches an ensorcelled condor fly upward from the scene. The Black Morinth attack the condor in the sky, but are killed in droves by its magic. Quick Ben screams at Paran to draw a card of the condor in the dirt. When Paran finishes, Quick Ben punches the card. In the distance, the condor falters in the air, then falls stunned. Going through a warren, Quick Ben and Paran find the condor, slowly recovering and building its sorcery. Quick Ben tries throwing a wraith at it, but the condor destroys it. Paran attacks the condor, stabbing it in the neck with a dagger. He feels the condor ripping at his face, then feels an explosion of bestial rage. Quick Ben watches as Paran is enveloped by a shadow-woven hound. He notes that Paran isn't soul-taken, but that 2 creatures are woven together, and that the power behind it is pure Curel de Merlin. The hound breaks the condor's neck with his jaws, then turns back into Paran, whose head has been mangled by the condor, taking most of his right ear. Paran doesn't seem to remember what happened, and Quick Ben takes him through a warren to a healer. Picker wanders through the woods until she reaches a clearing. Quick Ben's avalanche missed the bridge burners by a short distance, and Picker finds it difficult to believe that Quick Ben could do it on his own without the help of several high mages or a god. She meets Blend and tells her to find the rest of the bridge burners. Paran awakes in a trench that's serving as an impromptu infirmary. The wounds on the side of his head have been sewn up. Mallet arrives to finish healing his face, but Paran refuses, telling Mallet to see to the more seriously wounded. He travels down the trenches to meet Quick Ben, Picker, and Dujek, who tells him that the Panion forces have retreated back into the city. Whiskey Jack and Kaladin Brood are probably coming more swiftly than they thought, and the Panions don't want to be tangled up when they arrive. However, Dujek can't send the Black Morinth away to take a message to Whiskey Jack, as the condors are attacking anything that flies. The tunnels are indefensible, so the only option, according to Dijek, is to follow the backlights into the city. The bridge burners will take the Black Morinth and be the first in, using what remains of their munitions to blow up the walls of the main keep, then wait for the main force which will enter 30 minutes later. Perron is concerned about Whiskey Jack and Brood not arriving in time, but agrees to the plan. North of Coral. Corlett and Whiskey Jack are within sight of Coral. Corlett mentions that Collier has already approached her with an apology, offering his sword and tactical advice. This concerns her, but Whiskey Jack says he'd appreciate any advice, to Corlett's wry disbelief. Upon viewing Coral, Whiskey Jack mentions the flashes of sorcery they saw earlier, thinking that Dijek probably sprang the ambush the Panyan Seer was planning and interrupted his plans. Whiskey Jack wants to have his troops lining the ridge by dawn to distract the Seer from Dijek, and asks if Corlett and Orfantal would mind taking to the skies as dragons. Corlett says that Orfantal will fly towards Dijek, and she will fly about Whiskey Jack's forces to fight off the condors. As they head back to the main force, Black Morinth in the distance fly toward Coral. The keep. Perron and the bridge burners are flying through Coral when Perron spots movement among the condors. The corals land, and everyone dives for cover. Near the keep, they notice that the roof is covered in condors' nests. Hedge volunteers to lead a crew of crossbowmen atop a wall with explosive quarrels to take care of most of the ensorcelled birds. As they move closer, they notice that the keep's gate is held by Erdeman guards, but their watch post is well lit, so they don't see the bridge burners yet. The company moves to a dark corner of the keep where a large tower is located, and the sappers decide to put their munitions there. As Toes uses his warren to hook ropes to a far wall, Perron tells Quick Ben that they'll need another plan to deal with the remaining condors. As they wait for the sappers and the crossbowmen, the gate opens and Kane Chamal Cull hunters emerge, heading straight for Dijek's forces. Perron orders Picker and the rest of the bridge burners to distract them. Quick Ben, Deterin, Spindle, and Perron take a warren to the top of the keep amidst the sleeping condors. All at once several condors explode from the impact of the explosive quarrels. Picker's company discharges sharpers amongst the Kell hunters, and Spindle opens his warren, driving the possessed condors mad with fear. The demons possessing the condors begin driving their host birds upwards out of Spindle's range, and Perron orders everyone to run. Coral. Outside Coral's walls a cloud of dust slowly swirls into the form of Ono's Tulin. Tool thinks on how he could easily flow over the walls as dust, silently and unseen, but because the Panyan Seer had taken Tok the Younger, a man who had called Tool friend, he needed to make a bolder entrance. He walks towards the city. Dijek leads his troops into Coral when he hears the explosions on the rooftop of the keep. As they march, he feels a rumbling through the cobbles and knows that a breach has been made in the keep walls. He orders his men to drive for the keep and watches a flight of Coral delivering another 1,000 marines. Suddenly, a massive wave of chaotic sorcery from the sky obliterates the Coral and the troops they were carrying. Dijek sees 3 condors flying behind the wave of magic, and watches as the Black Morinth sacrifice hundreds of Corals and riders to take down the condors in a series of suicidal charges. This allows yet another flight of Morinth carriers to drop their marines into Coral, who then dive for cover. Dijek orders his troops to take cover in buildings, and wait for further orders before making toward the keep. Another messenger arrives and tells Dijek that the Panyan legions are marching in the streets, accompanied by Kane Chamal. Dijek thinks about Silverfox and the Tlan Amass, but his orders don't change. He tells another messenger to get Twist to send a regiment of his Morinth heavies toward the assembled legions, and watches as the last of his troops are delivered into Coral. Near the keep, Picker watches a Cusser go off and destroy the Kell hunter that was chasing them. Her diversion towards the Kane Chamal was effective, but the hunters swiftly turned on them, costing the bridge burners dearly. The undead reptiles are too fast for the bridge burners to fight, and with their munitions gone, the bridge burners are down to only 16. As another hunter arrives, a nearby wall explodes and a Tlan Amass appears. After a short exchange, the Tlan Amass has dismembered the hunter, and begins walking toward the keep. Picker orders her remaining troops to follow the Tlan Amass as it seems being near him is the safest place in Coral. The north gate of Coral. As dawn arrives, Whiskey Jack's exhausted army has formed a line facing Coral, the Ilgers clan to one side and the white-faced Barghast to the other. They watch the Condor attack on the Black Morinth, and all know that Dijek's army is trapped in the city being slaughtered. Some Condors are following the Black Morinth into the Mutins, but Orfantal is there waiting. As Corlett reaches the crest, she notices that there's a line of 800 Cane Chainmail near the city walls, poised to meet and destroy Whiskey Jack's forces. She thinks on how Kaladin Brood is still half a day behind them, and while the Grey Swords might arrive within 2 hours, they will be exhausted. Trake's legion seems to have disappeared, which doesn't surprise Corlett due to Gruntel's vocal dislike for combat. 20 Condors remain over the keep. Corlett approaches Whiskey Jack and tells him that her Teast Andii will go first and use Curled Galine on the Cane Chainmail. Collier scoffs at this, saying they need a full unveiling to cleanse the taint from their warren. Artanthos is looking down at the plain in front of the rows of hunters when the 2 Marines who once guarded Silverfox come galloping up shouting about her arrival. Silverfox appears and begins walking towards Artanthos. The Cane Chainmail are surrounded by flowing dust which forms into Tlana mass. The armies roar in triumph. Collier whispers, "Yes." As Corlett turns to look at Collier, he strikes her on the head with his sword, cracking her skull and infecting her with a chaotic warren. She sees Collier charge at Silverfox, who calls for the Tlanite to protect her. None appear, however, and Collier raises his sword. Whiskey Jack intercepts, fencing with Collier and gaining the upper hand. When Collier trips, Whiskey Jack lunges, but his injured leg fails him, the bone ripping through the flesh. Collier kills him with a sword thrust. Collier is thrown back by 2 crossbow bolts, but chaotic magic disintegrates them and heals the wounds. The 2 Marines begin fighting him in tandem. Both women are killed, but not before stabbing Collier in the stomach. Collier asks the crippled god to heal him when Corlett feels another warren burgeoning somewhere off to the side, not chaotic. Collier is struck by magic which resembles golden fire. The sorcery rips into him, and Collier escapes into a warren. The chaotic magic leaves Corlett's body, but she is still unable to move. Silverfox kneels by her, telling her that Kaladin Brood is coming and can heal her with High Denul. Corlett thinks on how Brood could have healed Whiskey Jack's bad leg any time, and the knowledge that her lover is dead sinks in. Silverfox looks over Corlett and reveals that Artanthos is really Tashrin in disguise. She accuses him of withholding his attack on Collier until Whiskey Jack was killed, and Tashrin weakly protests. When he moves into Corlett's vision, she sees that the taint on his warren split the skin on his face, and Corlett knows that Tashrin attacked as soon as he could. Silverfox tells Corlett that Nightchill has known of Tashrin's deception for some time, and was going to confront him just now. Corlett manages to speak and tells Silverfox to thank Tashrin for her life. As the sound of hoofbeats come closer, Corlett wonders if Hood is smiling now that he has claimed her love. Brood's camp. Before dawn, Gruntel comes to Itkovian and tells him that something has gone wrong with the main force, and he needs to move swiftly ahead with his legion. He tells Stani Menakes and Itkovian to follow if they can. Gruntel gathers his legion around him and they blur into the shape of a massive tiger, though Itkovian has a hard time focusing on it. The tiger speeds ahead of Kaladin Brood. Itkovian and Stani ride hard after it as the sun rises. As they pass the Malazan rearguard, they see the crackle of sorcery, and Itkovian is struck with the sense of immeasurable loss and sorrow. Sudden urgency overcomes Itkovian, and he moves away from Stani toward the ridge, while Stani joins Gruntel and his legion. Itkovian walks through the ranks, noting the broken, defeated mien to all the Malazans after the apparent death of one man, and thinks, "I am not yet done." He sees the Tlana mass on the killing ground below, who all turn as one to face him. The north gate of Coral. Gruntel makes it to the hill where 3 dead bodies lie, near Corlett, who has Silverfox crouching over her. He notes Orfantal emerging from a warren and Kaladin Brood arriving. Hetton and Krupp arrive as well, and Krupp slips into unconsciousness seemingly for no reason. As his legion readies their weapons, Gruntel looks around and finally spots Itkovian walking towards the Tlana mass. With a cry, Silverfox turns towards Itkovian and begins running, but Gruntle knows it is too late. Itkovian tells the Tlan Amas that he would embrace them all and take their pain. The Tlan Amas fall to their knees and bow their heads. Chapter 25. Kapustin Kal and Murillo are still inside the temple of Hood and Kapustin when another visitor arrives. The undead warrior in service to Hood greets him as Krull. Kal, remembering stories of the elder god, blocks him from getting close to the Maib, saying that he will not allow Krull to slit her throat on the altar. Krull assures him that he's there to save the Maib. He says that something has happened. The consequences are unknown to us all, and that the Maib must dream for real. The North Gate of Coral. Silverfox is frozen with shock. After Itkovian embraced the Tlan Amas, she no longer feels their presence. It feels like another betrayal in a long line. She sees the various forces readying for combat, the Grey Swords, Trake's Legion, Corlet, Orfantal, and the heartbroken Malazan soldiers, and thinks they're all doomed in the face of the Panyan Damon's forces of Condors and Cain Chamal. Hopeless, she thinks she will have to begin all that she had set in motion so long ago. She opens the warren of Telan and vanishes within. Telan. The Maib is in her dream world, thinking on how she was never fit to become a mother. Now she is trapped, and feels unseen forces demanding that she do something. The massive cage of ribs still stands before her, and she believes there is a man, a beast, within that's waiting for her. She hears the beast howl in agony and decides to free it. She begins to crawl toward the cage of bones. Coral. Itkovian embraces the pain of the Tlan Amas. He perceives what the ritual of Telan was, how it twisted them into lifeless husks, but learns that the Tlan Amas remember their lives, their love, and their grief. They have held on to them for the past 300,000 years. He relives their memories all at once, drowning in their sorrow and the betrayal at the summoner denying them peace. Itkovian thinks on how he promised them relief, but knows he will not be able to hold everything. He feels he is about to be destroyed when he hears the voice of Pranchol, who tells him there is a place he can carry their memories if he can only hold on for a while longer. Itkovian reaches out and feels a hand grasp his forearm. Telan. The Maib is crawling toward the cage of bones when she hears the rumble of thunder. She rolls onto her back and stares upward. The North Gate of Coral. Itkovian strides over a mindscape, holding on to the memories. Pranchol asks him to shed the memories to feed the land and so return life to it, as memories are what give all things unseen meaning. Pranchol tells Itkovian that the Tlan Amas all kneel before him and his gift, and asked him to weep for them. Telan. The Maib sees violent, billowing clouds in a once formless sky. Hail suddenly comes down, each stone impacting and revealing memories of ancient lives. As the hail nears her, she is sheltered by Krupp, who tells her that the storm is unexpected yet wonderful. He leads her closer to the cage. The North Gate of Coral. Silverfox is tormented by failure. She never intended to deny the Tlan Amas for good. She planned on creating a dream world where her mother could be young again, one that would bring healing to the Tlan Amas and the Tlan Eye. Yet, all around her mortals showed more courage than she could believe. Kal, Murillo, Whiskey Jack and the two Marines, Tashrin, and now finally Itkovian. She thinks all their courage misguided, and believes Itkovian is doomed to fail. She looks up as the sky overhead thunders, and her eyes widen. The keep. Tok the Younger lies in a room with the Cain Chamal matron and the Panyan seer as concussions and impacts grow loud around him. He watches as the seer creates a finis by drawing power from the matron's body and trapping it into a reptilian egg. The seer tells Tok that he will return, and disappears with the matron, leaving Tok alone. All the while he feels the wolf god, Tog, trying to draw breath, but trapped within Tok's mangled body. The sounds of battle cease, and Ono's Tulin arrives, picking Tok up and telling him they are leaving. Coral and the keep. Picker and the surviving bridge burners are near the keep at Coral, but are moving cautiously. A vicious battle is taking place within, sorcery exploding and Cain Chamal racing back and forth. A Kell hunter is spotted and they run towards the keep. Upon clearing the breach, they run into Hedge and the other sappers. As they discuss tactics, the Kell hunter arrives, surprising everyone. Blend throws Picker into another room and Picker, falling, watches as Hedge blows himself up in order to kill the hunter. After the explosion dies down, Picker gathers everyone together, noticing that Blend, while still alive, took the brunt of Hedge's cursor attack to protect her. Seemingly out of nowhere, Lady Envy arrives and asks if anyone has seen a Segula, or a female Tlana mass. When Picker mentions Tool, Envy offers to heal everyone in exchange for assisting the rescue of Tak the Younger. Picker agrees. One of her soldiers shouts when Baljag arrives. Envy tells them not to worry, though she wonders where Gareth has gotten to. Janose Paran and Quick Ben are still on top of the keep after their attack on the condors. Mallet, Spindle, Dedarin, Trots, and Ansi are still with them. Paran and Quick Ben discuss that something is making its way to the roof of the keep, and causing a lot of violence along the way, distracting the condors as well. Paran orders Mallet to take the rest of the squad and find what's left of the bridge burners and escape. Quick Ben and Paran stay behind, waiting. Coral. Dijik One Arm is alone after a Kell hunter slaughtered his untanned bodyguard. Onurm's host managed to fight off the Erdeman, Beklites, and Seerdeman along with the first two waves of Cain Chemal, but after their munitions were depleted, the undead lizards nearly wiped them out. He has no idea how many of his 6,000 soldiers still live, and the sounds of battle moved away to the keep. Now, however, the sky is full of rolling, lightning-streaked clouds, and the sound of the storm is dominating everything else. A marine finds him and tells him Captain Harab is still fighting, having received more munitions from Twist. Dijik tells her to lead the way. The north gate of Coral. Gruntle speaks to Norrell, the shield anvil of the Grey Swords. They plan to charge the amassed Cain Chemal and break down the gate in order to relieve Dijik. Both seem to know this is a suicidal charge. Tashran has taken over command of Whiskey Jack's forces, and sends a messenger saying that he will block the Panyan mages on the walls, and the Teast Endii and Barghast shouldermen will attack the Cain Chemal with magic. Gruntle gathers his legion, and they blur into a massive tiger. They charge down the slope towards the waiting Cain Chemal. Corlett is in shock, standing near the bodies of Whiskey Jack and the two marines. Kaladin Brood approaches, asking her about Moon's spawn and implying that if things continue to look grim for his forces, he will use his hammer. Corlett does not respond, but watches as Orphantal is attacked by the chaotic magic of the condors. The Panyan mages unleash chaotic magic only to be met by Tashran's High Tila's Warren. The tiger meets the Cain Chemal, though as hunters strike at the tiger, members of Trake's legion fall away, dead. Tashran's magic takes down a dozen of the mages, but Tashran is used up. The Grey Swords attack the hunters while trailing behind Trake's legion, and both are losing members by the score. Brood screams at Corlett to call Animander Rake, guessing that he's hiding Moon's spawn in the storm clouds overhead. She sees the storm cloud break up, revealing sunlight, and tells Brood that Animander Rake is dead. She turns into a dragon and races to aid Orphantal. Kaladin Brood looks around the battlefield. The Grey Swords are scattered, the Malazans and the Barghast are being slaughtered by the Cain Chemal, and the Tlana mass are all kneeling, oblivious to the battle. Brood asks Byrne to forgive him, raises his hammer, then freezes. The keep. Picker, Blend, the bridge burners, and Lady Envy are following a trail made by a Tlana mass, who is apparently being followed by a woman wearing moccasins and a man wearing boots. They pause for a moment to get their bearings, but Baljag rushes ahead. As Lady Envy begins explaining the relationship Tak and Baljag have to Tog and Fanderay, 20 Erdemen rush into the room. Envy seems annoyed and asks if the fight will take long. Picker pushes Blend up the stairs after Baljag, and noting her exhausted, ill-equipped soldiers, answers with a fatalistic, "No, it won't." Dedarin, Ansi, Mallet, Spindle, and Trots are moving through the keep, finding nothing but bodies along the way. As they descend a staircase, they're attacked from both sides by Seerdeman. Dedarin fights with Sixth in the cramped quarters while Mallet supports her with a crossbow. Mallet takes down 2 with well-aimed quarrels, and Dedarin kills the rest at the cost of her own life. Ansi tumbles down the stairs, covered in blood, but still alive. Spindle comes staggering down the stairs shortly afterward, saying that Trotz is fighting off 20 Seerdemen. Mallet runs to help, loading his crossbow, and is met by a tumble of bodies, Trotz among them, all fighting and snarling as they fall down the stairs. When Mallet stands up again, he notes that Trotz stabbed him, though Trotz himself has sustained more wounds than Mallet thought possible. He and Trotz trade grim jokes, find Spindle, and decide to carry Ansi the rest of the way. Tak is being carried by Tool, slowly remembering who he is and who Tool is. Tool stops in a room that was once filled with devices for torture, though all are smashed to pieces now. Tool sets him down, and Tak sees Mok blocking Tool's path. Tool draws his flint sword and asks Mok to take Tak away from the keep once they are done fighting. Mok agrees, and they begin to fence, moving too quickly for Tak to see. As the duel intensifies, the wolf inside Tak stirs, and he spies a broken beam capped in bronze. He slowly, painfully manages to rise to his knees, then, through force of will, stand. He nearly faints, but holds on. Telan. Krupp begs the Maib to touch the cage of bones, saying there are things that must be freed. The Maib reaches the keep. Tak watches Tool reeling. He steps toward the bronze-capped beam, then topples forward, impaling himself. Telan. The Maib touches the cage. The keep. Tak dies. The wolf draws breath and howls. The north gate of coral. Brood holds his hammer in the air when a god's howl rips through the air. The Tlan answer it, rising from the ground and slaughtering the Kane chainmail who run toward the gate. Something is happening above the keep. Telan. Krupp staggers with the unconscious Maib. The hailstorm stops and Tog emerges, howling. His howl is answered. On all sides. The keep. Paran and Quick Ben notice a gloom descending on the keep. Quick Ben calls it Kuild Galain and uses it to fly himself and Paran onto the balcony of the keep where the seer awaits with the matron and 2 Kel hunters. The hunters advance, but are met by Senu and Thuril. Quick Ben and Paran edge toward the harbor side of the balcony as the storm above dissipates. In the bay, the ice begins exploding, and the water seems to bulge, then finally part as something enormous rises from the water. Quick Ben screams that all the Teast Andii have unveiled Kuild Galain, and Paran realizes that Moon's spawn has been hiding in Ortnal's cut all this time. As it rises, Paran sees that massive fissures and cracks have formed in the floating mountain, pouring out seawater. 2/3 of Moon's spawn is visible as it spins slowly to reveal Animander Rake standing alone. The north gate of coral. Itkovian senses that all the memories he carried have gone. He tells the Tlan Amass he would take their pain. It rises before him like a wave, and Itkovian smiles in answer. Kaladin Brood watches as Kuild Galain blasts forth from Moon's spawn, filling the air, decimating the condors. He sees dragons emerge. He realizes that the Teast Andii have never done a full unveiling in all their time in this world, and wonders what will happen. He watches helpless. Corlett flies with Moon's spawn, feeling the power of Kuild Galain. She sees that the floating fortress is dying, but it is still moving inexorably toward the keep's balcony. She can see the seer, revealed as a Jag hut, holding a finist. Corlett notes the darkness overwhelming the city and knows it will never dissipate. The keep. Envy realizes Picker's words had only been bravado as all but 2 bridge burners are killed, and almost casually kills the Erdeman with a gesture. More soldiers approach, but Picker identifies them as Mallet and Spindle. Trotz makes it into the room but dies as soon as he comes to a stop. Envy makes ready to heal everyone's wounds, but feels the pressure of Kuild Galain and tells everyone they need to get downstairs. 5 bridge burners are all that remain. Tool is thrown up against a wall and loses his sword. Before Mok can strike the final blow, he's magically thrown to the side. Kileva appears, enraged that a mortal man defeated the first sword of the Tlan Amass. She wants to kill Mok so no one will know of Tool's humiliation. Tool stops her, saying that the time of the Amass is over, and humans are set to inherit everything. He sees Tok's dead body and Kileva explains that the wolf god is freed, roaming in a world made by Silverfox, though that realm now gives life to something else. Lannis Tog appears, asking for Silverfox. Tool tells her he will seek with her. Kileva tells them that Silver Fox can be found in the Warren of Telan, though Kileva says she is going to the seer. Tool asks her to seek him out once her quest for redemption is finished. She agrees. Tool and Lanistog leave. Baljag appears, and Kileva opens a Warren of Telan to allow her to find her mate. Kileva leaves the room. Blen steps from the shadows to find Mock unconscious, and debates taking off his mask. Envy arrives with the 5 remaining bridge burners, Picker, Mallet, Spindle, Ansi, and Blue Pearl. Envy declares she will have vengeance on the seer, but the bridge burners say they're leaving. They retrieve Tok's body and leave Envy's company. Piran watches the scene unfold, Moon's spawn drawing closer to the balcony, the Segula being driven back by the Kel hunters, the matron trying to claw through the tiles, and the seer staring madly. Quick Ben notes that Moon's spawn isn't going to clear the keep, and Piran realizes that Rake plans on obliterating the keep and everyone in it. Quick Ben and Piran decide to make their move, but are interrupted when Kileva appears as a giant panther. Quick Ben calls to Talamandas as the base of Moon's spawn smashes through the balcony's roof wall, crushing the matron. The floating mountain dips down, and the floor begins to buckle. Quick Ben knocks Kileva over with sorcery, then tackles the seer, taking all of them through a warren. Kileva follows. The 2 Segula jump onto the roof as a chunk of basalt drops from Moon's spawn, crushing the 2 Kel hunters and falling through to the bottom of the keep. The north gate of Coral. Gruntle collapses with his 8 remaining soldiers. The Grey Swords went in search of Dujek, and the Black Morinth have returned, throwing sharpers in the western part of the city. Meanwhile, Moon's spawn is still tearing through the keep. Stani Menakes finds Gruntle and tells him that the Mod Irregulars were already inside the gate when the Grey Swords arrived. Moon's spawn breaks away from the keep, then floats over Gruntle and Stani's position, covering them in darkness and raining seawater. The sound of fighting ceases, and Velbera arrives. She tells them that Dujek is alive with 800 surviving soldiers. All the survivors are gathering outside the city. Gruntle thinks about the now disappeared Clan I, Itkovian, and how he lost most of his legion to get 50 paces inside the gate. He tells Velbara that he'll follow. Corlet and Orphantal fly unopposed around Coral. Corlet sees Malazan Imperial ships coming from the sea into Coral Bay, and thinks about the plans within plans of the Malazans. Orphantal tells her to join Kaladin Brood and the surviving fighters while he and the newly arrived Solana guard the skies. Corlet hesitates, but Orphantal insists that she go and grieve in earnest. She sembles and approaches Kaladin Brood, who is talking to High Marshal Stump of the Mod Irregulars. Stump tells Brood that they made it behind the gates and took down most of the mages on the walls. Brood orders him to put out fires in the city, and admits to Corlet that he thought he'd left the Mod Irregulars behind. Corlet mentions the ships, and Brood says he knows. An Imperial Legate, a Governor, and all manner of titles are aboard, and Brood is willing to give the Malazans Coral and anything else they want. Corlet gestures toward the darkness now lingering about the city after the full unveiling, and tells him that Coral now lies equally in the mortal world and in Curald Galine. Brood asks if Animander Rake would claim Coral, given Moon's spawn is now broken. Corlet says she does not know, and turns away, walking toward the hill where Whiskey Jack lies. She begins to think about Mother Dark, and how she turned away from the Teast Endi so long ago, and wonders if it was grief that caused her to do so. Corlet asks if Mother Dark now smiles at her own grief. Moon's spawn floats overhead and seawater rains down, and Corlet begins to weep. Brood watches Corlet weep surrounded by dead warriors and Cain Chamal with Moon's spawn poised directly overhead. He knows what he sees will never leave him. Telan. Silver Fox walks through the Telan dream world and watches the Rivi spirits approach from afar, full of bitterness at her failure. She wanted to give back the life she stole from her mother, but thinks she did not have anything to give that she hadn't stolen from Pranchol, Krupp, Krull, and the Rivi spirits. When the spirits arrive, they tell her that they found 2 thrones and the true masters are soon coming. Silver Fox is angry, saying she made the dream world for them. They demur, saying the realm has grown too powerful for them to rule, and they look forward to serving the coming masters. Silver Fox cannot deal with this final injustice, and turns away when they mention that the Maib is in the dream world, and can be saved as Silverfox originally intended. As Silverfox leaves, she calls herself an abomination. The Rivi spirits start a fire, and discuss how they need to find the Maib. One spirit sighs that she will merely flee like she always has, but another says it will be different this time now that the land lives. Tog runs through the dream world, exulting in his freedom, howling his triumph. He hears other howls and sees the children of Fandere. He slows and Fandere joins him. They join minds for a moment. The god and goddess are reunited. They run toward their thrones. The Maib awakens in Krupp's arms, struggling to flee the approaching wolves. Krupp tells her that it is time this dream world passed to her. As she frees herself from his grip, she sees tens of thousands of wolves led by two enormous beasts. The Rivi spirits stand in front of a low hut of bones, and Krupp tells her that the beast thrones within belong to Tog and Fandere. The ancient body of the Maib now sleeps eternal, an agreement having been reached with Hood. The Maib will never awaken, but live in this dream world, never aging. The Rivi spirits say that Silverfox created this world to beg forgiveness from her mother, but grief has taken her away, leaving the Maib to silently beg forgiveness herself. Tog asks the Maib to release a cherished, mortal spirit from the realm. The Maib agrees. The North Gate of Coral. Itkovian finds within himself enough capacity to hold the suffering of the Tlan Amass. They ask him why, and he tells them of his life. Of a hard father, a timid mother, and how she smiled when he left to join Finis Reve. They still do not understand, and beg him to explain his compassion. He tells them that no human understands compassion, despite knowing what it is in the abstract. He says it must be given freely. They still do not understand, and ask why he will not answer their question. He falls slowly back saying, "Because I was the shield anvil. But now I am done." He dies beneath Moon's spawn. Telan. Silverfox is met by Lannis Tog and Onos Tulin with the Tlanai. Tul asks her to free the Tlanai, to make them mortal once again to live in the Telan dream world. Silverfox does so, appalled at how little effort it took. Tul tells her that Lannis Tog will lead her back to the Tlan Amass to speak, but Tul does not move. He drops his sword at his feet, and Silverfox understands. Kapustin. The undead warrior in Hood's service tells Kall and Murillo that the Maib must be interred in the sarcophagus. Kall and Murillo balk, but Krull tells them that she will not die, simply sleep and dream eternally like Byrne. Kall suggests they line the pit with furs and blankets, guiding a still confused Murillo. Rathtog and Rathfandere have taken off their masks, tears in their eyes at the reunion of their gods. Morn. Quick Ben, Piran, Talamandas, the seer, and Kileva appear at morn. Kileva tries to attack the seer again, but Piran stops her when he takes the form of a hound of shadow, though he doesn't realize what's happening. Quick Ben tells both the seer and Kileva that there's a way where everyone can win. Kileva wants vengeance on the seer for her brother, and promises equal pain for what the seer did to Tok the Younger. This revelation rocks Piran, and the seer accuses Kileva of already having done that. It is revealed that the seer was one of the Jag Hut children that Kileva sent through the rent during the Jag Hut War before the ritual. The matron, who was once trapped within the rent, took the seer, but left his sister, who still remains trapped within. The seer is mad with terror, saying he does not trust Kileva, and that he remembers her promising that she was sending him and his sister to their mother. When Kileva admits that she eventually learned exactly what she did, the seer calls her a coward for not undoing it. Quick Ben explains that they can now put the Finist into the rent and save the seer's sister, and that she will need someone to help her, still being young and lost and looking for her mother. The seer thinks they will only be killed by Tlan Amass once they open up Amtos Felix. Quick Ben says he knows a way to heal Amtos Felix in a place no Tlan Amass can find it. He explains that the seer has been manipulated by the crippled god, and that his need for such wanton destruction and cruelty was never the Jag Hut way. The seer pauses at this, and Piran tells Quick Ben to release the seer as a gesture of mutual trust. Kileva says that the seer has been twisted after all he has done, and he cannot be trusted to be left alone. Piran tells her he will not be alone. Talamandas releases the seer. The seer's sister, still a young girl, emerges from the rent. The seer isn't certain he can care for her, as families aren't kind to one another among the Jaghut. Piran convinces him to let her be the guide to heal all that he's destroyed, starting with himself. The seer turns to Kileva and asks about the brother she mentioned. Kileva says he participated in the ritual of Telan. The seer says they both have a long way to go to make amends to their families. Neither can forgive the other yet. The seer takes his sister in his arms. Burns' realm. The party arrive at the caves where Quick Ben first learned of Burns' infection. The Witch of Tennis arrives, and tells the seer that by unveiling Amtos Felak here, he can slow the infection and strengthen the giants holding up the walls. She warns Kileva not to tell anyone about the unveiling. Kileva agrees. Quick Ben tells Piran, as master of the deck, to create a card to lead them out of the caves. The North Gate of Coral. Gruntle is at the meeting place for the surviving armies with Corlett, Kaladin Brood, and the bodies of Whiskey Jack and the two Marines. He sees the grey swords approaching at Kovian's body, the Tlan Amas gone, and their prisoner Anister still a hollow shell. The surviving Malazans exit the city, and Gruntle sees that Dijak has obviously heard of Whiskey Jack's death, his shoulders slumped. One of Gruntle's legion asks to raise the child banner from Kapustin. He tells her to raise it in the gloom where the rest of their legion died. She calls him the Mortal Sword of Trake, a title which he balks at, but she does not relent. Taishran arrives, making introductions to the dignitaries aboard the ship, among them an ambassador named Aragon. Kaladin Brood insists that negotiations wait until Anamander Rake arrives. Tok the Younger's mind is full of fragments of memories, his torture at the hands of the matron, his death, the feeling of exultant running. He finds himself sitting on a horse surrounded by the grey swords. A woman approaches and tells him that Tog has delivered his soul into a mortal body, and that he must choose to continue with his god or leave it. Tog chooses to stay, and the woman calls him the mortal sword of Tog and Fandere. Telan. Silver Fox and Lannis Tog find the Tlan en masse who all stand differently now that their burdens and sorrow have been lifted. The Tlan en masse are awakened, and remember who they once were without the burden of millennia of pain. Silver Fox offers to end the ritual of Telan, but Pranchol says no. Lannis Tog has spoken of a war that other Tlan en masse fight in a different continent, and the ones gathered here want to rescue their kin. Silver Fox says she will join them. She asks what changed after Ekovian's deed, and Pranchol says that the Telan dream world Silver Fox made has been changed, given life. It is now a place where the ritual of Telan unravels, hence the surprising ease when Silver Fox made the Tlan immortal. The memories of the Tlan en masse now dwell in the land, and it is what they will return to once Silver Fox ends the ritual. Pranchol says they expected the only way to be free of their pain would be to die utterly, but Ekovian found a way they did not expect. However, Pranchol says there is one last thing they must do before they leave. Coral. Picker and Blend watch the Rivi wagons transporting dead bodies from the wreckage at Coral. Picker thinks about how the bridge burners all really died outside of Pale, but a few did not realize it until now. Envy arrives, complaining about Rake's attack when Rake himself arrives via Warren. He trades a few impatient words with Envy, who warns him that Draconus seeks to escape Dragnapur with the help of Geno's Piran. Anamander Rake does not seem concerned by the news and dismisses her, much to Envy's annoyance. Blend tries to console Picker, who is racked with guilt on her failure to keep her squad alive, when Rake asks if he can accompany the remaining bridge burners to the gathering north of the city. Picker mutters that they aren't pleasant company, but Anamander Rake insists that they are worthy company. The North Gate of Coral. Gruntle and Stani are on the hilltop when Stani says that Harlow should have been buried with the rest of the combatants. Gruntle agrees. Dijak arrives and examines Whiskey Jack's body. He asks Corlett if the shattered leg was responsible for his loss, saying that Whiskey Jack was a superb swordsman who could hold his own against even Dassa Multer. Corlett lies and says the broken leg came after. Dijak's only words are, "I have lost a friend." And the simple truth in those words is enough to move Gruntle to tears. Gruntle then sees the rest of Onurm's host gather around, and sees Mallet walk to Whiskey Jack's body. The healer observes the wounds and, realizing the truth, seems to collapse inwardly. Animander Rake asks Corlett if she plans on doing anything in response to Collier's betrayal. Corlett says that Orphantel is going to hunt Collier down, and Rake tells them to leave him alive so he can use Dragnipper. Rake turns to Dujek and says that he would have Whiskey Jack and the 2 Marines interred inside Moon's spawn along with the dead bridge burners. Picker agrees. The mod irregulars have stolen the table that the bridge burners made while in Black Dog Forest. The painting of Piran has been glowing for some time, when Piran, Quick Ben, and Kilava appear. Jib Bowl of the mod irregulars walks to Piran and confesses his confusion as to the table's nature. Kilava having parted from their company, Quick Ben and Piran walk toward the plain in front of Coral. Piran is still reeling from the recent events, and recalls Quick Ben's explanation that Burns' realm is now home to an ancient warren, memories of ice, all working to slow the infection of the crippled god. They pause when they see the mass of figures crowded beneath torches. Gruntle watches as Animander Rake and the Teast Ndi complete the interment of the bridge burners inside Moon's spawn. He sees the grey swords holding a modest burial service for Ikovian, and grabbing Stani, walks their way. Once there, he notes that Anister is sitting differently, no longer an empty shell, and feels that they are somehow rivals. Norrell says a few words, and gestures for the burial to begin when Ezra Jael, the Malazan soldier who traded helms with Itkovian, offers to return Itkovian's finer helmet. Norrell tells him to keep the helm, that Itkovian would not ask for it back, but stops when she sees that Onurm's host, the Black Morinth, the Rivi, the Barghast, and the Teast Ndi have all gathered in a massive, silent congregation. Gruntle's gaze continues past them to see that the Tlanamas are approaching. A bonecaster comes forward with a seashell, saying that each Tlanamas has a gift to lay at Itkovian's grave and thanks for the gift he gave them. As they pass, the gifts pile higher to become a barrow, bound with Tellan sorcery, each piece immovable. After the Tlanamas are finished, the Malazan soldiers do the same. After the last soldier leaves the hill, Gruntle's arm torques fall away, and he apologizes to Trake for adding them to the pile. Moon spawn. Piran is numb after hearing of Whiskey Jack's death and the deaths of the bridge burners, and not having been able to be at the funeral. Quick Ben asks Piran to draw a card of Moon's spawn as it slowly drifts away. Piran does so, and the two walk through it into Rake's throne room. They see 30 sarcophagi lined up on either side with 3 atop a dais in the center. The coffins are guarded by Curald Galine with Animander Rake having cast the wards on Whiskey Jack and the 2 Marines himself. Quick Ben names each bridge burner one by one until they reach the dais. He explains that Whiskey Jack must have shattered his leg while performing a lunge, meaning he had Collier dead. Whiskey Jack would still be alive but for a marble pillar toppling in a garden in Duruhistan. Quick Ben places a pebble near the dais so he can visit again with Kalam. As they leave, Piran silently blesses the bridge burners. Once gone, a mysterious light begins dancing among the webs of Curald Galine. The north gate of Coral. While crossing the road, Gruntle spies Bauchelane and Corbel Broach's carriage approaching. Emanciper re-stops the carriage with Gruntle blocking the path, and Bauchelane emerges, saying how much he admires Coral now that it is wreathed in darkness. Gruntle tells him the Teast Ndi and Malazans would not tolerate Corbel Broach's hobbies, and Corbel Broach agrees. Bauchelane tells Gruntle that he received an invitation to meet with Jib Bowl and his brothers. Gruntle advises him to wear his best, and continues across the road. He notices the Grey Swords encampment, and the large number of Tenascauri recruits that have emerged after learning of Anister's rebirth. Gruntle considers the new mortal sword of the Grey Swords, and makes up his mind that he doesn't like him already. However, when they meet, Anister tells Gruntle he has no idea what it means to be a mortal sword, and asks Gruntle for advice. Gruntle smiles and says he does not either. They trade stories about who they once were, and Anister suggests they talk more about it over a cask of ale. Gruntle agrees, saying he will bring Stani. Anister calls him a friend, and Gruntle silently agrees. Piran and Picker watch Quick Ben talking with the Trigal Trade Guild as they wait for Dujek. Picker tells him that he shouldn't have left her in command, and Paran says that walking out of Coral with survivors was better than anyone could have done. Dijik arrives, looking like he's aged 10 years, and agrees. He tells them that he's collected back pay for the entire company of bridge burners, and wants to give it to the 6 survivors. They will be counted among the dead, and the Trigal carriage will take them to Duruhistan. He tells them there's one last mission, and that's to visit a man in the care of the High Alchemist Barak, and see what can be done for him. He dismisses them, and asks for Quick Ben, whom he calls High Mage, saying that Tashrin insisted. Dijik tells Paran that a command still waits for him as Dijik returns to 7 cities to reinforce Tavor Paran. Paran refuses, saying he was never cut out to be a soldier. Dijik disagrees, telling him that everyone sees Paran as a true nobleman, and tells him to join his fellow bridge burners. Tak the Younger retrieves the cask of ale from his tent and mounts his horse when he is approached by what looks like a scar-covered Barghast. The man says nothing, only looking at Tak. When Tak asks if he needs anything, the man says he only wanted to see if he was well. He leaves, saying that he holds Tak in his memory. As he leaves, Tak thinks there's something familiar about him. Tak leaves as Velbara calls to him. The scar-covered Barghast is revealed to be Ono's Tulin, newly returned to flesh. He meets Kileva, who mentions that he will need a sword now more than ever. Tul suggests they find a quarry. Kileva promises to enchant the blade so it will not break like she did long ago. Lady Envy wakes Mok up. He seems shocked at the state of Senu and Thuril, but Envy says none of them have come out unscathed. Rake has banished them from the city. Their punitive war with the Panyan Daman is ended, and they need to go home. Mok begins to argue that they should have an audience with the 7th, but Envy refuses. She simply smiles at Mok's anger. Hetan and Kafal are walking apart from their father and the rest of their clan when Hetan spots Tul and Kileva. She calls to them and introduces herself, finding Tul attractive. She tells him she sees that he has not bedded a woman in a long time. His eyes widen, he smiles, and says, "Indeed." Epilogue. Finished House. Jano's Paran enters the finished house and calls Rayist. He tells the Jag hut that he intends on moving in, and wants to leave a pack full of gold for safekeeping. Rayist is not pleased to see him, and asks what he will do with the still prone bodies of Ralik Nam and Vorkin. Paran does not know, but tells Rayist about Picker and the remaining bridge burners' plan to turn an old temple to Krull into a tavern. He doubts anyone will go, given that most of Duruhistan believes the temple to be haunted. Rayist turns away, unenthusiastic about the prospect of seeing Paran again. Paran exits the finished house, nearly stumbling upon a lame beggar. The beggar tells him of a vast fortune he buried in the Talan Mountains, promising half of the riches if he would help him retrieve it. Paran gently refuses, warning him not to loiter near the finished house, which does not approve of strangers. The beggar laughs, saying he knows of one house that does. Paran shrugs and leaves the beggar. Krolles Bar. Picker, Blend, Spindle, Ansi, Mallet, and Bluepearl sit in a nearly empty tavern with only Kal, Murillo, Paran, and Krupp for company. The opening of their tavern is a disaster. Picker sits and stares at the one other guest, Diker. The historian was resurrected by Barak, and has no physical flaw keeping him from speaking. Yet for 2 weeks, he has said not a word, only clutching the small rag he received from the nameless marine he shared a night with on the chain of dogs. Barak enters, and Krupp offers to tell him a tale of how he and Krull created a new world. Barak declines, and Picker volunteers to tell the story of the taking of Coral, though she asks Paran to start. Paran demurs, and all of the bridge burners say it is still too soon. Spindle asks if there is any value to a story that will just break your heart. Diker suddenly speaks, saying there is value. The book ends when Diker says, "Very well, permit me, if you will, on this night, to break your hearts once more. This is the story of the Chain of Dogs. Of Colton of the Crow clan, newly come fist to the 7th Army." That was a recap of Memories of Ice by Steven Erikson, Malazan Book of the Fallen, Book 3.